This happened a good 20 plus years ago, and I had forgotten about it until this day. I think it's a good reminder that sometimes the most unexpected things can happen when you least expect it. This event really made me feel like I couldn't be safe anywhere, and caused me to be hypervigilant every time I left my house. And that feeling stayed with me for a long time afterwards. Also, a trigger warning. This involves assault of a sexual nature. It was wintertime, about 11 in the morning, and I was standing at a bus stop. This bus stop was in a mini mall, where there is a bigger department store, a dollar store, and a little shop. I was going to catch the bus to my brand new job, and that day was going to be my very first day at the new shop. So I was excited and nervous and definitely wanted to make a good impression. While I was waiting for the bus, I realized I was a good 15 minutes early and also that I had forgotten my gloves, and it was bitterly cold out and my hands were freezing. But I only had a couple of dollars on me, so I figured it would be cheapest to buy new gloves at the dollar store. And when I went into the store, it was quite big, but there were no other people in there yet, besides this older man behind the front counter. He gave me a big smile and came around the counter to stand next to me. I asked him where the gloves were located, and he said, "I show you." As soon as he had said this, he laughingly grabbed my left hand with his right one and starts bringing me back towards the back of the store. The back of the store had a display table with some stuff on it, toys I think. On the wall behind the table was a section with winter items on it, and just to the right of that is a door that says, "Employees only." Everything happened really fast. When he grabbed my hand and started bringing me towards the back, I just kind of awkwardly laughed because he was laughing, and I just thought that he was an overly friendly guy who was trying to be super helpful. I had also been in the store a couple of times before this, and both times the same guy was there. But he was ringing people up and he was always happy, smiley and laughy with every customer he interacted with. I never got any weird vibes any other time I was in there. So, just as we got to that back area, out of nowhere, the hand holding mine clamps around my wrist really hard. His other hand reaches over, grabs my breast ridiculously hard, twists it, and starts trying to push me towards the employees only door. I couldn't believe how fast everything changed and this happened. I'm so happy that I had worn my shit-kicking boots that day, because the only thing I could do was kick him in the shin and try to pull away from him. We went back and forth with me trying to get away from him, while he tried to get a hold of my arm tighter, and while also trying to push me towards the door while I'm still trying to land kicks. And in all of this, he lost his balance and started to fall onto the display table. And then I was able to get my arm away, and I just took off running as fast as I could. I ran into the back of the big store next door. They had a customer service department there where there were other people and phones. So to try to wrap this up, I used the store's phone to call my mom because I don't know why. I was confused if I should call the cops. I was trying to figure out what just happened, while also realizing shit. I had missed the bus and I'm going to mess up my first day at the new job. I did call the cops though, after I got off the phone with my mom who came to get me. The way I looked at it was like, okay, I was alright, but what if I hadn't gotten so lucky? What if this guy does this to someone else and they don't get away? What if something even worse could happen to someone else, or already did? This happened in broad daylight, on a weekday morning, so this could happen to anyone. They arrested him and we had to go down to the station to give my statement. About a week later, there's an article in the newspaper that they arrested 5 people that owned the dollar store because they had apparently been setting up these dollar stores for a few weeks as a front for some shady stuff, and then they would close it down, wait a month or two, go to a different county and open another one. Like I said in the beginning of this messed with me for quite a while after that. I didn't feel safe when I left my house. I just wanted to buy a dang pair of gloves that day. So guy from the dollar store, please, let's not meet again. To start things off, this incident occurred in a small town community where it's not really crime-ridden or exactly dangerous. Around this time last year, I was working full-time at a little Japanese retailer shop at the mall near my house. My schedule fluctuated, but the majority of my shifts were closing shifts. I preferred this because it gave me enough time to sleep in and make myself a lunch, catch the bus, get to the mall a bit earlier to buy snacks and a drink, before I would begin my dreaded 8.5-hour shift. On one particular day, as I was getting ready to walk to the bus stop, I saw a big commotion going on right across from my house at the town hall. I crossed these streets right in time before several other police cars and an ambulance rushed by, sirens wailing so loud, I'm sure the entire neighborhood heard them. I was wondering what was going on, but quickly disregarded it, as I got on the first bus nearby my house. I got off at the intersection where I was supposed to take a second bus that leads straight to the terminal across the mall. While I was waiting at the shelter, I see a guy around my age in his mid-20s staring right at me, with eyes so black and empty. Mind you, there was no one else around besides the two of us. I remember thinking to myself that it seemed odd he was wearing a sweater with a heavy-looking backpack and construction boots, both of which were oversized for his tall, slim figure, when it was blazing hot outside. Not even for a split second did he tear his gaze away from me. And then it quickly hit me that I recognized him as a regular customer that frequently comes in to buy earphones at the store that I worked at. Now, I usually try to keep to myself, but for some reason, I've been told I draw all kinds of people to me with my friendly, positive aura. I felt the need to pretend that I was on my phone to avoid any sort of conversation. He then proceeded to take a seat beside me, still gazing at me, and mustered a "Hi," before going on that he recognized me from work, and if I was going there right now and so on. When the bus finally arrived, we both got on and he took a seat next to me. We had small talk about random stuff and our hobbies. He went on to tell me that he was in a broken relationship with his parents, where he ended up getting kicked out. I assumed that he was homeless at first, but he kind of confirmed it subtly when he told me that he's been couch surfing between friends' houses. We finally reached the bus terminal that's across the mall. He ended up walking me to my work. I didn't ask him to, before going off on his own way. Before departing, he asked for my phone number, which I stupidly gave to him and told me, if you ever just want to chill or smoke with me, to text him. After conversing with him, I shrugged off any preconceived judgment that I had of him earlier of being creepy, for just a guy that's socially awkward and perma-fried. He ended up texting me later on that night asking to hang out, but I cut the conversation short, telling him that I was tired and also I had to work the next day. I never heard from him again. Now, here's where things get interesting. After a few days and then weeks, news reports were coming out that there was a violent sexual assault that occurred right where the trails were across my house, near the town hall. The victim was a teenage girl who was going for a walk when she was struck with an unknown object by the suspect. He happened to be armed with a gun and proceeded to assault her before leaving the scene. It took about a week for the police to find the suspect. The investigation was ongoing. It shook up the entire community. Nothing like this had happened before. It's fairly peaceful and close-knit. And it's scary because it happened right in broad daylight. So when police released images of the suspect with his name, following his arrest, I damn near had a heart attack. It was him, the same guy who I met at the bus stop, who had walked me to my work, who asked for my number, who was texting me throughout the day, after committing the crime. He had the same dark, black empty eyes, long hair, and wearing the exact sweater, backpack, and shoes. I started looking at past news reports to compare the dates and times to when he texted me, and they all matched. Needless to say, my intuition about people are on and off, and that I should learn to trust it more. I felt a bit of guilt hoping I could have done something earlier, but there was no way for me to know until after. This happened about a year ago. Everything was spread out over a couple of months. I'm known for being a very smiley, bubbly, and social girl. Okay, here's my experience. At the time this happened, I was the only person who did to-go orders, answered all phones and customer questions as well as greeting and cashing out to-go or delivery orders. It was mid-December and where I live, we have a massive Christmas festival and tree lighting. So at the time, I was getting multiple phone calls asking if we would be open, if there are any specials and so on. I answered the phone and the typical script was said, blah blah blah. He was nice, but after I answered his questions about our restaurant, he started asking questions about me, my age, how long I had worked there, if I was from where the restaurant was located. I felt weird but made an excuse that he didn't have any more questions about the restaurant and I needed to go. He told me that I sounded beautiful and he couldn't wait to meet me. It bothered me a little, but I soon forgot about it. Jump forward a few weeks. The festival's here and we're busy. I'm helping in all aspects of the restaurant, and our bartender comes and grabs me and tells me a man at her table wanted to speak to me. Me thinking that it was a complaint, I tell her okay and I put my best customer service smile on and I go over. Hi everyone, I hope everyone's okay over here, but I heard from our wonderful bartender. One of you wanted to speak with me. My god, you're as beautiful as I dreamed you'd be. It's me, the guy you spoke to a few weeks ago. You were so amazing and I just loved you since then. I was visibly freaked out, and I said, "Oh, thank you. Is anything else the matter?" He said, "No, I just had to see what my new wife looked like." "Oh, well, I've gotta go. Y'all have a great night," I responded. I walked away a little nervous, but soon I got distracted. The bartender comes over and tells me that the guy, John, wanted to say goodbye. So I give a smile and I wave, but that was not good enough. He comes to me, arms open, and wants a hug. I awkwardly smile and try to give a distant side hug. And not good enough for him. He grabs my shoulder, causing me to face forward, and gives me a really tight and hard hug. The night's over and I just ignore my uneasy feelings. I end up becoming sick for a couple of days. I come back and my manager comes to speak to me and tells me that John had called the restaurant around 56 times and would only want to speak to me. As we're discussing this, the bartender tells me someone wants to speak with me on the phone. I go behind the bar and answer, and guess who? It's John telling me that he loved seeing me and couldn't wait for us to get married. I hung up. My manager and I just decided to block the phone number. I finish my shift and I start walking to my car. I notice a car parked weirdly in the parking lot. I just giggle and ignore it. The car starts pulling up and says something. I'm not paying attention though, and I don't really hear them. I get into my car and I start replying to texts and I check my phone. I notice the same car is now parked beside me. The window is cracked so I can see that they are facing me, but I can't tell much else. The car then continuously pulls up to each side of my car and stares at me from each side for 5 minutes or so. I notice that it's John, so I'm scared. I was too scared to drive off, thinking that he would follow me. The only thing I could think to do was call my job. 4 guys come sprinting out of the back with knives and the car drives off. We don't have cameras on our parking lot. It's really crappy, I know. They calm me down and I drive home, watching everything around me. That night, my phone started acting extremely weird, shutting on and off, out of control as in apps are opening, even though I haven't touched them and it has never happened before. I decided to shut my phone off completely, knowing that I had another option of calling someone if need be. I wake up the next morning feeling nervous. I get ready for work and I head out to my car. As I'm pulling away, I notice something on the side of my house. I go up to see it's 2 pocket knives. One appeared to have blood on it. The other was above my head, so I had to step back and notice. The second knife was stabbed into the picture. I noticed that it's a picture of me at the store shopping. I was done and I called the police. They take my statement and do the whole process you have to go through when reporting something like this. To make this long story a bit shorter, 2 other scary things that happened were pictures taken of me at random times, and areas were thrown all over my deck and a note left in my car at work that said, "Hi pretty, I love you." The paper looked like it had been soaked in blood. It was fake though. So now the number is blocked. Everyone in my restaurant knows what this man looks like. I get walked in and out of my job by a male manager or a coworker. I have cameras everywhere and weapons. I hate having to do this, but it's for my protection. Nothing has happened for a bit. I just figured others would find this interesting, or maybe it would help someone else and make them feel less alone. This was about 6 or 7 years ago when I was 17. I worked as a soft-line clothing sales associate at a large chain department store. My job was to walk around the floor and essentially keep everything organized. I would fold clothes, clean out the fitting rooms, put items that had been returned back in the right place, and help out any customers who needed it. Generally, I liked the job. It was easy and all the girls that I worked with were around my age and really cool. One of my least favorite parts of the job was answering phone calls. The customer service desk would put relevant calls through to the phone in the appropriate department, for example, women's or kids, and whomever was assigned to that area for their shift would have to answer it. These calls usually consisted of speaking to an employee from another store location about finding an item and putting it on hold for a customer, or speaking to a customer directly about whether or not we had an item that they were looking for. It wouldn't have been so bad if the phones were cordless, but they were not. I have too many memories of having to run back and forth between the phone and the rest of the store, as I looked for whatever the person on the other end had wanted. But I digress. One particular summer day, I remember because the uniform was khakis and a hideous green polo year-round, so I was sweating my ass off. There was a call for the kids department. I made my way over to the phone and I took the call. It was a man speaking in a low voice, as if he was trying to be quiet. The conversation went something like this. "Hi, do you have any socks?" Me being slightly annoyed because this is a clothing store. Obviously we have socks. "Yes, we do." "How big are they?" "Do you mean like what size?" "The kids' socks are just sized like shoes are. So we have socks that fit a range of sizes, like 4 to 6 and so on." "Yeah, but like, how big are they about?" I was very annoyed now because what did he want from me? "I don't know how to answer that. What size shoe does the kid you're shopping for wear?" "Oh, I'm using for an experiment." That's the last part of the conversation I really remember. It was at that point that I was creeped out by more than his voice, because he sounded like a weirdo. I don't remember how the call ended. I know for sure I maintained my professionalism and found a way out of it, because I can remember telling the girl that I was working with at the time. I ended up telling most of the girls who worked in soft lines with me, because, all creepiness aside, I found it genuinely hilarious. It might be worth mentioning once again that all of us who worked in the clothing department in this store were high school age students. It didn't take super long for one of my colleagues to get a similar phone call. We happened to be working together, and she came to tell me about the weird phone call she just had. We compared our experiences and decided at this point that we should tell a manager, since it apparently wasn't a one-off thing. The manager at the time was a woman around my mother's age, who also happened to have a daughter in high school. I was relieved when she looked disturbed as we recounted our stories, and told us to come get her should he call back. And if you guessed it, he did indeed call back. You get a cookie. The next few times he called, the same colleague got him, and she said the conversation always started with him asking for socks and becoming progressively more creepy. He would always ask really specific questions about how big the socks were and what colors we had. When he asked anything about what he needed for them, he always gave some vague, creepy answer like, an experiment. The way that she described it, he seemed to be escalating from his first few calls. It seemed like he would ask more questions or be breathing more loudly as he called back more often. What bothers me the most about this now, though, is that it always had to be kids' socks. He always called the kids' department, and he always confirmed he was looking for kids' socks when asked if he would rather be put through to the men's department. The next time I got the call, I tried to be subtle about the fact that I was getting a manager. I think that someone else had made the mistake of saying something like, "Hold on, let me ask my manager." And by the time the manager got the call, he had already hung up. As soon as I heard, "Do you have any socks?" I fought the urge to vomit as I tried to be casual. After he asked his inevitable, weirdly specific questions about the sock sizes, I told him that I had to place them on hold so that I could go check. Of course, I bolted for the manager's office at the back of the store, probably looking like a lunatic. My manager dropped what she was doing to come back to the phone with me and take the call. The dude was still on the line when she picked up the phone, but as soon as she introduced herself and asked how she could help, he hung up. I didn't hear anything about him calling again after that, and I sincerely hoped he got scared enough to knock it off. More likely though, he just started calling somewhere else. This may not seem that creepy. At the time I thought it was relatively harmless, but I've since heard similar stories about weird calls to retail workers, which prompted me to share this here. So, I'm 23 now, but when this happened, I was 17. In my last year of high school, I was the art chick. I was working on my portfolio so that I could apply to art school. I mainly did landscapes, but part of the requirement from our portfolios was life drawing. Obviously, my high school didn't have any nude life drawing classes, so my art teacher linked me up to a life drawing class at the local university, which is one of the top art institutions in the UK. So from my school, I had to get a half-hour bus to the center of the city, and then walk maybe 15 minutes up a long stretch through the student district. It was a 6-week course, and this happened the 5th week. The class was really interesting, and I learned a lot since this was my first time working with life models. I was pretty confident, and not too worried about walking alone at night. The class finished at maybe 9 p.m., and it was pretty dark by the time that I got out. So, 4 weeks of walking there and back, uneventful. The 5th week walking there, totally fine. 5th week walking back to my bus stop, also totally fine. The 5 minutes at that bus stop, freaky as hell. So the stop I had to wait at was outside the expensive private school in my city. There's a strip with about 4 bus stops, and it's always pretty busy. So busy that people don't even see what's happening right in front of them. So, I must have been one of the first people there, so I'm standing just outside of the shelter because I'm smoking. And obviously, I don't want to be a dick and make other people breathe in my smoke. So there were only a few minutes left until my bus, and I'm minding my own business when this guy comes up and stands super close to me. Like, not as in infringing a bit on my personal space here close. Like literally, I can feel him standing against me. He must have been in his 40s, and just had that general creepy vibe, and looked really grubby and disgusting. So obviously, I'm a bit freaked out and I sidestep away. So does he. I look at him and he has the creepiest smug grin. By this point I'm like, okay, so he's trying to freak me out and he knows that I know. I step away again, like fairly far away this time. He follows me again and is literally standing with the front of his body dead up against the back of mine. Honestly, I don't know how nobody noticed this or called him out. We were outside the shelter and it was dark. People are on their phones or in their own conversations. I guessed it must just have been that. 23-year-old me is so pissed off at what an idiot I was for just shrinking away from him. This was before I had a few more similar experiences that have shaped my loud-ass radical women's rights advocacy. I literally just froze in the moment, even though there were people around who would have helped. I let this creep stand and push his dick up against me, probably for the same reason we all allow this shit. I don't want to overreact. Maybe it's a misunderstanding. I don't want to seem rude. Please note that I am no longer afraid. And so anyways, it gets worse. After dodging the creep for a few more moments as time dragged in slow motion, finally, this bus comes around the corner. Now, I might not have reacted properly, but I'm not stupid. I know that if I get on the bus before this guy, he's gonna sit next to me, which is what I needed to avoid. So politely, I gesture and say, "After you." He gives me that creepy look again and says, "No, you go first." I insist, but he refuses again. There's a big queue now and I don't want to hold anybody up, so reluctantly, I get on right before this guy. I get on the bus and do the only reasonable thing, which is to sit next to an old lady right at the front of this empty bus. The seats are in pairs, so there's no way that he can sit beside me now. Like I said, this bus is almost empty. So where does he sit? In the seat directly behind me. Great. So I'm just sitting there trying to ignore him, which is pretty difficult to do when this guy keeps leaning forward and literally playing with my hair. I have really long hair and his hands are on it. So don't ask me why, but at the time, my phone would let me call my mom. But whenever I tried to text her, the sending bar would just stick. I don't know if anyone else has had this on iPhone, but when the little green bar at the top gets to about 90% of the way, it just sticks. That happened literally every time I tried to message her. Obviously, I was scared to call her. I didn't want him hearing what I had to say. I messaged my friend and told her what was happening, and that I thought that if I got off this bus, the guy would most definitely follow me. I still had a 10-minute walk home after I got off this bus up a long straight road. So my friend calls my mom and tells her what's happening. My mom then calls me and relays what my friend had told to her. Now, I had been on this bus for about 15 or 20 minutes and my stop was coming up in 5. It's not a big city. My area is suburban and I don't know everyone, but I think I recognize most. But I had never seen this guy before. He wasn't local to my area, so I reasoned he had definitely been on this bus longer than his stop. Anyway, when my mom called, I just said to her, "I'll be getting off in about 5 to 10 minutes. You need to get to X Street now and meet me." As soon as I said that, the creep pushes the button for the next stop. Literally as soon as I say it. He stands up and makes sure to bang into my arm and drag his body hard across as he walks past. He stares at me from the door and through the window as the bus drives away. I'm not 100% certain if he actually had bad intentions, or if he just got off on freaking out a 17-year-old girl who was on her own. The fact that he had pressed the button as soon as I had confirmed someone was meeting me makes me think he intended on following me. I didn't go to the final week of that class. So when I was in high school, it was my senior year. I was 5'3", about 95 pounds. I was at the park down the street from my house waiting for the school bus. Usually my boyfriend, who was already graduated, would drive me to school, but he was busy. I later found out that he was cheating. Well, there was usually a few of us girls there waiting, but this day, I was the only one. So I sat on a bench and had one headphone in and one headphone out, so I could listen to my surroundings. I've always been cautious of what's going on around me. As I waited, a black Honda pulled up and I immediately noticed it. I kept an eye on it because I had a bad feeling about it. I wasn't making it obvious that I was watching it because I didn't want to look crazy. But after a few minutes, 2 big men got out. I immediately texted my boyfriend that I was at the park, and these guys were creeping me out. Of course he didn't text back, so I copy-pasted the same text message to my cousin who was home. I lived with my aunt and 2 guy cousins, unwinding down from the night shift. I wanted someone to know the car make and color, plus it was 2 men. I didn't get any responses though. When they got out of the car, they started to walk towards me. So I got up from the bench and walked towards the street because the bus was supposed to be there any minute. The driver actually ended up being a little bit late. As I stood by the street, these men walked up to me and I could feel the bad energy. One guy said hello as the other stood there staring me down. I just did a small smile and a nod and then looked away. And then the same guy, I'll call him number 1, asked how old I was. I didn't respond. I could tell the other guy, number 2, was getting mad that I wasn't feeding into it. Then number 1 kept asking me yes or no questions, like, do you have a boyfriend? Do you live close? Do you do drugs? We have some, do you want some? And then number 2 asked me if I knew what the black market was. I felt a cold rush go over my body and I got the chills. Number 2, who was quiet the whole time, started to tell me they just got back from Russia, but the way that he said it was so scary, almost intimidating. I knew they were from somewhere else because they had strong accents, but I couldn't pinpoint the place. They kept telling me to go to their car because they have drugs. I said no thank you. Trust me, I wasn't a straight edge in high school, but I wasn't stupid either. I would never get into somebody's car that I didn't know. And then number 1 asked if I had a car. I said no and that my bus is almost here, sorry, I have to go. And by some sort of miracle, the bus rounded the corner and the guys backed off. They had been inching closer and closer as they asked me more questions, but before the bus got to me, number 1 handed me a card and said he has a car shop and to call him sometime if I need anything. He even stated he would give me a free car. The card looked shifty and I didn't want to grab it, but I knew that I needed that number on to report it. So I took it and they walked off super fast. Finally the bus stopped and it picked me up. As soon as I got on it, I started to cry. I had a complete meltdown. It was like all the adrenaline was keeping my mind and body aware and focused while the men were there, but as soon as I was safe, my body and mind gave out. Thankfully, there weren't many people on the bus, so the driver calmed me down before we took off, and I explained to her what had happened. When she looked around for the car, they were gone. She said that she saw them around me but thought I knew them because they were so close to my person. The driver called into her dispatch saying that there was an incident so that they could notify the school. She continued to pick up the other students, but when we got to the school, she walked me into the office. I was absolutely terrified to be alone. The principal came out and so did campus security. They were sweet and gentle with me as they brought me back to the principal's office. Both were men and they proceeded to ask me questions about the 2 men earlier, their car, and the questions that the creeps had asked me. I cried the whole time. And then I pulled out the card the guy gave me and handed it to the principal. He looked at the security and said he was going to call it and act like my dad, and so he did. It was on speaker and number 1 answered. I knew his voice as if it had been burned into my brain. It took everything in me not to have a panic attack. The principal asked the guy if he could get him a car at a good price, and the guy played dumb. The principal said his daughter, me, gave him the card. As soon as he had said this, the guy hung up. They tried calling again and the phone was shut off, and then eventually disconnected. I could see a shift in the principal and security as soon as the phone had clicked. The security got on his phone and called the police, and had them come to the school. It was as if they finally knew it was real, like my crazy story wasn't made up. The principal excused himself and the security guard, and they talked for a minute in the hallway. I could hear everything they were saying. She's lucky to be alive. This is serious. We need to call her parents to come get her. When the police got there, they came into the office that I was sitting in and asked me for the story again, and in front of the principal and security guard. I feel like they wanted to see if I was being 100% honest, so I obliged. The officers were straight up with me and told me that it sounded like they were watching us girls at the park because they chose the one day that one of us were alone. He also said the card was being used as bait to get me to go where they wanted. I felt sick and I couldn't breathe. The school called my aunt, but she didn't pick up. The only person that picked up first was my boyfriend. One of the officers talked to him as the other finally got a hold of my aunt. My boyfriend ended up picking me up and taking me home, and I cried the whole time. When I got there, my grandma, uncle, aunt, and mom and cousins were all out front. The women were all in tears and the men were livid, but worried for me. A week later, some girl at another high school not far from the park was saved by other students. She was being dragged into a black Honda by the two guys. The other kids had stood up and grabbed her and pulled her out of the car. The principal called me into his office, and that's how I found out. They also had these same officers there and had me choose the two guys out of a picture lineup. I pointed them out so fast, and they were caught. It was in fact those two guys that tried grabbing the girl, a freshman girl. I felt worried for her and sad she went through much worse than I did, and I felt almost free again. Still scared but not looking over my shoulder as often. I couldn't believe they were caught. After that, my family teamed up to drive me to school for the rest of the year. My boyfriend, now ex, also took me some days. I'm thankful to be alive and well, and I'm even more thankful that the girl was also saved by the courageous kids at her high school. So I just moved to New York back in July from Mississippi, and hadn't had any problems until January. So I go to a high school that's maybe 10 minutes driving away from my house, and I take the bus every day to and from school. Usually my mom will pick me up from the bus stop and take me home, and I usually only have to wait like a minute or two. But this day, I was waiting for like 10 minutes, and I called her a couple of times and she didn't answer. So I assumed that she had fallen asleep, like she does sometimes. So I decided to walk home. I usually go in a straight line for 3 streets and then make a right and walk straight down from there. On this day, I was wearing a tank top with a jacket on, Batman pajama pants, and old school style Vans. The perfect outfit for walking in the snow, right? Anyways, as I'm walking straight down, I see a man who is in front of me, and walking the same way as me, so I take the right turn early, as I can just walk that way, but it just involves a couple of more turns. Because I like to be cautious when dealing with other people on the street, especially if I'm alone. So as I'm walking down and starting to make the right turn, I see the man is now walking the opposite way he was before, and is now walking towards me, which sets off some red flags in my head immediately. This guy is probably 5'11" to 6 foot tall, wearing a black beanie, a tan jacket, and blue jeans. And I'm a very small girl, 5'2". So I knew that if he wanted me, he definitely had a high chance of getting exactly what he wanted. So I naturally start walking faster than I already was and turn as he's probably 10 yards away from me. And I'm walking really fast straight down. I'm walking for about 5 minutes, turning around to check and see if he had made the turn after me, and I didn't see him until the last time I turned around. He made the turn and he was walking straight for me. So I start speed walking, while I'm also on the verge of a panic attack, and all adrenaline is kicked in, and then so does he. I stay at the same speed for a couple minutes, so I don't tip him off and let him know that I can see he's following me. After that couple of minutes, I see my house, and I just book it to my house and turn around to see him running after me. I finally make it to my house, and just start crying as soon as I get inside the door. So one Sunday afternoon, I was waiting at the bus stop alone after an outing with a friend at the mall. The bus stop was at the final stop for all the buses, so there were many buses coming and going and staying. I saw a bus driver get onto the bus and asked if he was a 14, and he said that he wasn't going to be driving, so I said okay and patiently waited for my bus. A few minutes later, I saw him get into a bus. He made eye contact with me. I think he was wearing sunglasses, and then he gestured with his hand to come to him. So, me trying to be nice and being a kind person, I did just that. He told me to take off my mask because he couldn't understand me when I tried to talk. He then proceeded to tell me how beautiful I am, and how I was such a rare beauty, and how he's never seen anyone as beautiful as me before, and who gave me these gleaming eyes and so on. I am used to guys who are significantly older than me hitting on me, because I am well aware that I am pretty, and I look 18, so I generally like to inform them that I'm 15, and they tend to leave me alone after that. But this guy didn't seem to care one bit that I had just turned 15, and continued to flirt even though he was 26. He proceeded to make sexual comments about my body, and kept looking at my chest. He was about my height. I'm 5 feet tall. After 10 minutes of conversation, he asked me about my sex life, and I had enough, so I texted my mom to call me. When I was on the phone with her, I was getting off the bus and he grabbed my hand. I yanked it away from him and got off, feeling sick. We went to the police station to report it, and I had to do a confrontation. Basically, they brought him in with zero warning, and I had to tell him or confront him. He argued like a 7-year-old, and I actually got him to confess in 6 minutes. But please, let's not meet again. I am and always have been a very introverted, anxiety-ridden kid. I always imagined the worst of the situation, but this time it was worth it. My cousin had persuaded me to meet her older boyfriend and his friend at a pizza center. After reaching there, I found out that her older boyfriend was in college and was 20. My cousin and I were 16 at the time. I got really anxious and wanted to leave, but I couldn't, because my cousin started blackmailing me and would not let me leave. After 30 minutes, our pizza arrived. It was at that I realized that the janitor of the pizza store was staring at me. I stared at the opposite direction and I thought to myself, what a creep. My cousin's boyfriend took out 4 bottles of Coke from his bag and gave one to each of us. I noticed the seal on my bottle was broken, and I, not thinking much of it, glanced at the janitor and he was shaking his head vigorously, and I finally understood what he was trying to say. I asked the boyfriend about where he got the bottle from. They all laughed and said, "Duh, from the counter." By that time, I was so annoyed that I ran to the counter and shouted at them, asking, why would they sell a broken seal bottle to a customer? And before they could say anything, I heard someone shouting, "Hold them and do not let them go." I turned around and saw the boys and my cousin trying to storm out of the place, and 2 police officers were holding them down. I got so confused and so lightheaded that I collapsed on the spot. 2 female employees of the store had picked me up and put me on a chair, and I made the best decision of my life and I called my dad. The whole story that we found out after that was my cousin, her boyfriend, and her best friend tried to drug me so they could take me to the boyfriend's house and kidnap me, and ask my father for money, which to be honest is the dumbest plan ever. Like, how would they even take me out of the mall, which the pizza center was in, after I was unconscious? Anyway, the janitor heard their master plan when the boys were in the restroom and were discussing the plan. Another dumb decision, which prompted the janitor to inform this to the store manager and them calling the police. This is why our order took so long to come in. He saved me from being drugged. Don't know much about the kidnapping though, and I thought that he was a creep. My aunt, who was a single mother, tried to disown her daughter but later kept her and took her to therapy. The guys went to jail for a 1.5 years. They were also charged with 6 thefts, and I do not know what happened to them after that, but the only thing I want to tell them is, let's not meet. And P.S. I still meet the janitor when I go to the mall and he's a good friend and not a creep. My cousin and I don't get along though. When I was 17, I worked in a large mall at Vans. I had a lot of creepy older guys come in and flirt with me, but one guy took the cake. One day, I was working the usual busy as hell Saturday nights, and there were 4 very tall men that asked for my help getting shoes. I worked at an outlet, so the store was large with tall racks. The mall that I worked in was extremely popular amongst locals and tourists alike. The mall had some history with being a trafficking hotspot for context. So anyway, the men said that they were from Nigeria, and they were all pretty chill at first until they began to flirt. One man kept saying that he had a son in Nigeria and asked if I wanted to wed him. I laughed because I thought he was joking, but suddenly he looked extremely offended. I was awkward and I began talking about the shoes, but the man interrupted me with saying how great his son was and that I would make a great wife. At that point, I grew uncomfortable because I didn't want to be rude, so I asked for a coworker to come over to take care of them while I went to the bathroom. Everything was normal for the remainder of my shift. I clocked out and I was waiting for my dad to come pick me up. I usually walked around the halls of the mall as I waited. The music was soothing and all was calm. I walked past a restroom hall and saw a figure standing in my peripheral. I glanced and saw it was the 4 men from earlier. I was in full-on panic mode at that point, but I played it off. I smiled at them softly and kept walking so they didn't think I was being rude. And sure enough, they began following me. I picked up my pace, hoping to find other people walking around, but there was no one. I was speed walking, but the guys were keeping pace with me. My thoughts were to just go to the bathroom so I could lose them, so I entered the next restroom hall. I walked slowly, thinking that I had lost them, but soon after I heard pounding footsteps in a hurry. I looked back and they were coming right for me. I didn't think the bathroom was an option anymore and I started yelling for help. I ran straight for the employee corridors of the mall. Right when I got through the doors, a security guard met me on the other side. I bumped into him and I never felt more relieved in my life. The men took off the other way, and the guard let me stay in his office until my dad came. Thank God for the guard. If he wasn't there, I probably wouldn't be writing this right now. I deliver pizza, and I've been having a really busy night. Non-stop back and forth, without any time to even pause and take a leak. It's been so busy that I wasn't really thinking about bathroom breaks. But we're also going through a bit of a heat wave in our area, so I've been drinking copious amounts of water. All of a sudden, as I was driving to this particular delivery, the urge to go hit me. Like things went from 0 to 60 in an instant. Thankfully, I was close to the customer so I could go and get this one over with quickly. Or so I thought. I pulled up to the house and it was an area that I'd delivered in before, so I could immediately see that something wasn't right. All the lights were off in the house, not even the glow of a television or anything. It was extra apparent because the streetlight closest to the door happened to be out of order, and on top of it all, the block was dead quiet. This is a big university area, and obviously there aren't many student renters in July, but there had to be at least one person because someone ordered this pizza. Maybe they just liked sitting in the dark or they were out in the backyard, whatever. I just didn't want to get out of my car and knock on a quiet house in the middle of the night. It was around 9:30 p.m. Without first checking that I had the correct address and the customer was inside. It was scorching that night, even after sundown. My car's AC is a joke, and the piping hot pizzas don't help things much. So I have to try and open the car door as infrequently as possible to keep any cool air in. I called the number the customer provided, and the voice on the other end said, kind of brusquely and out of breath, "Yeah." I just tried to keep it clear and concise. "Hey, it's your pizza out front, but there doesn't appear to be anybody home." And the customer replied, still gasping for air, "Yeah, I'm not home." I had to pee so badly by that point that I was much less patient than I'd otherwise be with the customer right out of the gate. "Well then, we're going to have to terminate the order. Because I've arrived in the stated delivery window. You were supposed to pay in cash, though. I don't know what to tell you. Plan ahead next time. I instantly regretted letting my bladder do the talking for me, as the voice on the other end came through more clearly as a young, bubbly, and very strong girl who couldn't have been older than 20 or 25. My gosh, I'm so sorry. I was running down the street so I could barely hear you, she cried. I just switched you out of my AirPods. Is that better? Sorry, I completely lost track of time at work, but I knew you were coming. That's why I'm literally running home right now. Please don't leave. I'm starving and I don't have a car. Seriously, please don't leave. 5 minutes tops, okay? I know what it's like to be hungry and running late, and to have no car but not to live near any restaurants. Plus, when I heard her voice, I began to remember more specifically having delivered to this place a couple of times before, and she had always been perfectly nice. Now I felt bad for snapping at her. I tried to walk it back, while simultaneously looking out my window for potential spots to pee. No, my bad. I'm letting the heat get to me and it's not your fault. No need to rush. See you when you get here. I hung up and, while surveilling the street, was starting to think I was really out of luck. All of the other houses had people in them and were close together, so there were no clumps of trees or out-of-the-way patches of land or anything. Of course, I just tossed my empty water bottle at the last delivery because I'm an idiot. Finally, I decided it was escalating to the point of an emergency, and the safest bet was to use a bush in front of the woman's house. She wasn't home. The streetlight was out so no one would see me. The people who were home were inside. My car was parked across the street and we're a small shop who don't wear uniforms. So if someone did spot me, they would have no way to connect me to my employer. Animals pee outside all the time. Humans are animals. This is fine. I scurried over to the tallest bush in her front yard. She didn't really have much of a yard, more just a walkway lined with bushes and flowers that ran adjacent to her front door. The biggest cluster of bushes, the only one where I could be sure there would be no visible splatter on the side of the house, was about 4 feet from her door. I looked both ways, unzipped, and I let it fly. After the initial millisecond of relief, I noticed the sound was way off. More like peeing on something solid than something leafy. I started panicking, thinking that I had aimed wrong. But once I start, I can't stop midstream. So I kept squinting into the darkness to see if maybe I was hitting a key rock or something that could just move over a few inches. Instead, all of a sudden, I heard a way more concerning noise. A deep voice exclaiming, "What the hell?" And before I could turn around, assuming that I had been caught by a neighbor, a man came leaping out of the bushes. He blew by me, brushing my golden shower off of him as he did. He spit pretty emphatically on the ground, so I think I might have beamed him right in the face. I didn't see where he went after a few paces, but though his next part is kind of a blur, I do think I remember hearing a car screech out from a bit further away after a minute. I had gotten some night vision by that point, so I was able to make out his height, build, and outfit, but only the most general details of each. I was in such shock that I didn't even put my dick away. I stood there trying to figure out what had happened. The reality was so terrifying that my mind refused to accept it, and impulsively searched for a reasonable explanation that could make everything okay. I thought, could these bushes lead to some backyard area and just look like they were against the house? Could they have been obscuring an open window? My inner voice was desperately screaming, "Bruh, the man was wearing a hoodie in 90-degree weather. That was a bad man. You're in a bad situation." But the very idea that I was within inches of a guy who would be hiding in bushes at all, let alone in front of a young woman's house at night, just wasn't something I was ready to grapple with yet. I was coping by not coping. My fight-or-flight response totally failed me at that point, because my dumbass did the absolute last thing I should have done, and approached the bushes to try and validate this. There must have been a good reason for a man in a hoodie to be behind these bushes in the middle of the night. That theory. So I walked over to the side, turned on my phone flashlight, and tried to peer around the line of shrubbery. Pro tip: as scary as things may look in the dark, seeing them with a single beam of your flashlight can sometimes make it even worse. That's when I saw the bag. There was a tattered drawstring bag sitting behind the bushes, slightly splashed with pee. But I was in such a moronic daze from shock that I groped around for it thinking, see, this is it. This will explain why he was back here. And it explained it alright. Once I maneuvered it over and pulled it open, I saw a sharp knife, a roll of duct tape, and a bottle of pills. The delusions officially broke at that point, and all the adrenaline, endorphins, and self-preservation instincts that had been suppressed kicked in 10 times over. I became whatever the opposite of dazed is, more laser-focused than I'd ever been in my life, with one singular goal: to get back to my car. I dropped the bag, booked it across the street, got in my car, and slammed the pedal to the floor before the door was even all the way closed. I went as far as I could as fast as I could until I hit a red signal, and then pulled off to the side and realized that I shouldn't be driving any more than necessary in the condition that I was in. I pulled into the parking lot of a 24-hour drugstore and took a breath. I was finally calm and coherent enough to zip up and formulate a plan of action. My first lucid thought was, who do I call first? The police or the girl whose house that was? I thought about it for what couldn't have been more than 10 seconds, but felt like an hour, and decided, okay, I'm in a locked car with the engine running. If trouble starts, I can drive away. I know something's up, and she might not. She needs to know not to keep walking in that direction. But as I was dialing her number, it occurred to me, what if there was no girl? I thought I remembered delivering to that house before, but what if I was wrong? What if the girl on the phone was just a decoy to get me there to rob me, or worse? Every pizza guy on the planet has seen the Evil Genius documentary by now, so I thought. She called me all out of breath. She wasn't home. The whole thing was off and I can't risk it. I'll start with the cops. I called 911. The operator was very helpful in keeping me calm, because I was complete wreck by this point. He kept assuring me that someone would be there soon. He kept telling me that they had to get there before the girl did, but I was trying to express 3 thoughts at once, and really damaging my own credibility. It came out more as, you've got to save this girl because he wasn't after me, I was just delivering the pizza. Unless they were after me, in which case there might not be a girl, but I talked to one on the phone, so then you should find that girl because they used her to lure me there. But if she's real, she doesn't know about the guy who was also real, and there could be more guys if there's actually a girl. And you know what? Even if there isn't a girl, there might actually be more guys. I only checked one part of the bushes, so I don't actually know. But we'll know which guy is the one I saw because I pissed all over him. You know. I didn't mean to. This was back when I thought the girl was real but not home. But she might be real, so you really need to find her if she is because the guy was real. Finally, they basically just asked me to stop talking and stay on the line. But that was when I saw an incoming call from the customer. I couldn't answer it without disrupting my 911 call, so I just ignored it. But then she sent me a text like, "Hey, I'm here. I don't see you." I told 911 that she was there, and they said officers were only minutes away. But who knows how long that meant, especially after I had given such a scattered account of the events in my panic. I just felt overwhelmed with guilt, because my rational mind said the odds of her being a decoy girl for some large scam targeting pizza guys were low, and the odds of her being the intended victim of a predator were high. So I put my 911 call on mute, where I can hear them but they can't hear me, and turned back, heart absolutely pounding out of my chest, compulsively muttering, "Shit, shit, shit," the entire way. Then I took 911 off mute and told them that I had returned to look for the girl. They weren't happy about that, but I saw her meandering past the parked cars on the street, looking to see if one was mine, and I waved her down, flashing my brights. She bounced on over to the window of my car, happy-go-lucky. I figured that was a good sign that she wasn't in on whatever this was. But I was just so scared to be back in the general area and to not know what had just happened or what was going to happen. I kept whispering, "Get in, get in." And she was like, "Get it, huh? Oh, you want me to get the pizza from the back?" I didn't want to make the same mistake with her that I had made with 911. So instead of trying to tell her the whole story, I stuck to the bare, basic facts. "There is a man in your bushes. I'm on the phone with the police. I don't know where he is right now. Please get in the car so we can lock the doors." I was barely able to even get those sentences out, and I was shaking like I had just had 10 cups of black coffee. I held out my phone with 911 on the call screen to verify it for her. I thought that was why she got in the car with no further explanation, but it turns out that wasn't entirely it. "Are you still there? Is she with you? Are you safe? Is anyone else there?" 911 kept checking in, not knowing who the third party I was talking to was. I reassured them and we drove, more cautiously this time, to a location 911 instructed us to wait as to speak with police after they cleared the area. I didn't actually have to do much after that. The police came pretty soon after. A police car met us. I gave a statement telling them everything I had observed, and she went to go speak to more officers in more detail than they needed me for. It turns out the reason she got right into the strange pizza guy's car without probing any deeper into my story is because she knew who the man was right away from my description. She had an abusive ex-boyfriend who was apparently psychotic enough that he immediately came to mind from hearing, "There's a guy in your bushes." She later called us to thank me and insisted on leaving a huge tip. I wasn't there when the call came in, so the kid who answered didn't know to refuse to accept the money. But the manager already promised the next time we see her, we can load her up with enough 1 free pie cards to last a lifetime. Easily the scariest thing that has ever happened to me, on the job or off. I don't get the chance to tell the story much because I try to avoid sharing it with anyone who could possibly know the girl or know of the event. But I'm still not the same sense. Even though I know he didn't even have anything to do with me directly, this truly shook me to my core. I used to reside in the city of Houston. I grew up in the burbs, but moved inner city as soon as I could get away from the strip malls and chain restaurants. I moved to Inner Loop, Houston. The 610 Loop is a freeway that unofficially separates the metro core from the residential, industrial outskirts of the city, to a small, historic neighborhood, the Montrose District, that was mostly attractive to college students. Montrose is pretty socially liberal and probably the most out there Houston neighborhood, culturally speaking. Lots of cool antique rental properties and garden apartments for singles and couples in their 20s. But not the kind of area that most people can afford to purchase a house or have the space for a family. I was very young when I first moved to Montrose, so I ate it up. The dive bars, the restaurants, music clubs, coffee shops, street fests, proximity to the museum district. It was great. But every pro has its con. Montrose wasn't super scary, crime-ridden, or anything. Or at least I never felt unsafe there. But it was a little rough around the edges. Drugs were easy to come by, which meant a high concentration of drug users, obviously, and the behaviors that often come with it. Car break-ins were relatively common. My window got smashed twice in 4 years, which seemed about the average. There is a decent-sized homeless population to be berated by. And don't get me wrong, many of them were perfectly polite and harmless, but there were a good handful that were bold, shameless, and persistent. While muggings weren't the norm, and to my knowledge, none of my friends were ever mugged, it was definitely important to be aware of your surroundings if you were out and about, especially if you were alone or it was after dark. So one morning, about 8 a.m., I'm heading to work. My stop off at the drugstore on the corner next to my apartment to grab a juice and some cigarettes before I hit the bulk of my commute. There's typically at least one homeless guy hanging out in this particular pharmacy's lot at any given time, but it's not worrying. They're usually passed out and they're no trouble, just resting in the shade from the structure away from the hot sun. As I'm walking in, I see a grizzled, white homeless dude wandering around the far end of the parking lot, quite a ways from me. It seems strange, as they don't tend to panhandle here and it's too boiling hot to be comfortable wandering around on the asphalt in direct sunlight. And additionally, I didn't see any cars parked in his side of the lot, and no one's around for him to interact with, so his movements seemed aimless and random. He sort of glances my way, but it's hard to tell from that distance if he's looking at me or not. From where I'm standing, it looks like his eyes are just randomly darting around, fixating on one point of the parking lot, and then he quickly strides to that empty spot. And then he finds another spot a few feet away to look at and then skitter to. I don't feel threatened, but I'm definitely aware of his presence and questioning his stability. I make it into Walgreens undeterred, get my stuff, and I wait in line to pay. I'm inside 2 or maybe 3 minutes tops. I step out of the exit and I glance towards my car. I feel relieved when I don't see Mr. Crazy at my end of the lot, so I start walking to my parking spot. I've made it maybe 5 to 10 feet from the store's exit. The car's another 20 feet or so away, when he appears seemingly out of nowhere and steps directly in front of me, blocking my path. He asks me if I have any money that I could give him. He's older and pretty worse for wear. I feel bad for him, but I'm creeped out and in a hurry to get to work. I tell him what I often say to panhandlers, and it's usually true. Sorry, I don't carry cash. I step around him and keep walking, quickening my pace. I hear his footsteps follow me, just as quickly. From behind me he demands, "I know you have change." At this point, I'm rushing to my car, a hair away from breaking into a sprint. "I'm sorry, I can't help you." I loudly respond without so much as glancing back towards Nutter Butter McGee, who is still on my butt. I hit the unlock button on my keys and I have my arm out, ready to reach for the door handle. My hand slides onto the handle. I yank my car door open and I jump into the driver's side of my sedan. Before I'm even seated correctly, I immediately grab out to slam and lock the door. But it's too late. The Psycho Sam is now facing me, standing in the space between the open car door and I, blocking it from closing with his entire body. My car was just your standard 4-door, so as you can imagine, I am now in awfully close quarters with the Crazy. And to make it even worse, he leans down so that his face is just about level with mine. His hair and beard are unkempt. His eyes are wild. As if I needed further confirmation, I didn't. This is not a sane individual. "Give me all of your money." He didn't point any weapons, at least that I could see, or scream or raise his voice. He just sternly said the words in a very matter-of-fact tone, as if this were the obvious directive and my compliance were a given. I was terrified. I stared up at him for a second, not knowing what to do. In an instant, adrenaline slammed into me, and instead of immediately responding to his demand, I kept eye contact with him on my left side, while my right hand shoved the key into the ignition and turned. No," was all that I could squeak. Ladies and gentlemen, that was the day that I ran over a hobo's foot, and I would do it again too if I had to. Some slight background. I'm a 27-year-old pre-op trans male, and I still appear very effeminate. I moved back home after I finished college in December of 2016, partially to save on my own bills, but also to help my mother, who had increasing physical, mental, and emotional challenges due to a physical disability. We discussed the situation for a few months and figured that, since it was so seriously mutually beneficial, that my moving back in was the most logical thing for me to do after finishing college. There was 1 week this past summer where there were a couple of homeless people who were hanging out in the front hallway of our apartment building. This hallway only goes to the apartment my mother and I live in, and there's a staircase right next to it to go to the apartment above mine, and there were only 2 apartments accessible from the front entrance. One night around 2:30 in the morning, they knocked on the door several times over the course of a minute or two. We, my very nocturnal mother and I, ignored them until they started banging on the door. I then walked up to the door and knocked back to mess with them. I worked night shift and was exhausted enough to be done with this BS. They then immediately knocked in after grabbing my softball bat and hiding it behind my leg. I opened the door to ask what they wanted, prepared to fight if I needed to. They said that they wanted a cigarette, and I told them that we didn't have any. I am a smoker, but I had smoked my last cigarette a few hours prior, and I hadn't gone out to get a fresh pack yet, and I shut the door. They knocked again, and I told them that if they didn't go away, I would call the cops. My mother got ready for bed not long after, and when I checked around 4 a.m., they were still there. My mother was still awake, so I let her know that I was going to call the police. I would love to say that that was the end, but they ended up coming back a night or two later, banging on our door again. I didn't even bother warning them. I just called the cops this time. Luckily, they left after the cops talked to them, and I haven't seen them since. Though when I went to leave the house the next morning, I found they had smeared poop all over the wall right outside of our apartment door. This occurred in October 2017. I'm currently a 14-year-old male, but at the time I was 13. I had just started the 8th grade. I lived in a mixed, suburban commercial neighborhood in New York City. I live with my mom. I have a dad and siblings and family on that side, but they're separate. Although that's another story for another day, and we've been to hell and back with the crazies. Panhandlers and stalkers to druggies and the drunks, you name it. However, this was disturbing. My mom's ex will always help us out with rides to and from school, which is like 2 neighborhoods over. We are very close with him, and thank God he was there for this. We live in a corner building only 4 floors tall, and he drops us off and waits for our confirmation text that we are inside and safe. Mind you, it's just after 3. Some background. My building is actually 2 joined together. The main entrance is to the courtyard, and then if you go to the left, you're at the door of the 39 building, and we are on the 45 side, which is to the right. My mom fumbles with the keys, and then I step inside while my mom is still on the doorstep with some bags. I'm about to go up the stairs. We live on the 3rd floor, and there are 4 units per floor. My mom asked me if I smelled anything, and I said no. She said that there is a very strong smell of beer. Within a few seconds, something starts pouring from above onto us. At this point, we both went into the doorstep. Since it was coming from far up, we originally thought that whoever was pouring the beer was on the roof. This wasn't outrageous because we have heard people on the roof before that were working. We look up and for a brief second, see a face in one of the windows in the stairwell. So I ran back to the car to get my mom's ex. I said that there was someone in the building or on the roof that was pouring beer down on us. I told him to please come with us to see what was going on, because we were starting to freak out knowing that someone was on our building property, which is private with bad intentions. We waited in the courtyard for anyone to come out of the building, including my 2-year-old, that was 1 at the time, Maltese puppy who was very protective of us in his bag. Sure enough, a dirty-looking man, late 20s, maybe early 30s, comes out of the building, and we smelled the beer so we knew that this was him. Also, we had never seen this man before, and since there are only 4 units per floor in the building, we knew who lived where, and this man definitely did not belong. And we then were absolutely sure that he didn't have good intentions, because Buddy, the puppy, starts growling, and then begins to scratch in the bag. We watched as he went to the entrance to the courtyard, and then turned right onto our block. We followed slowly behind and watched as he walked up for 2 blocks. Thinking that we were in the clear, we started to relax. However, he then turns around and at a very quick pace, begins to walk back down the street towards us. My mom's ex whips out his phone and begins to record this. He makes it back to us and stops a few feet from us and then points to the phone. He then gets very close to my mom's ex, who asks, "Can I help you?" He tries to look at the phone screen. I guess he knew that he was being videotaped. And then he tries to play the victim by asking why we were harassing him and following him. My mom's ex snaps back with, "Why are you in our building?" Mind you, he doesn't live with us, so this was very good of him. He then said that he comes into our building often, red flag number 1. That he sees my mom walking the dog late at night, red flag number 2. And that he's going to come back and scare us, red flag number 3. What the heck does that mean? Has he been stalking us and watching us when we didn't know it? When he was dumping the beer on us, this was on the landing between the 2nd and 3rd floors, which is right near our door. So hopefully, this is a coincidence. We are really freaking out now, but the guy casually walks away. My mom's ex tells us to stay safe and get inside, and then to text us when we are in the apartment. And then my mom's ex gets back in his car and follows the man 2 blocks down when he gets onto the bus. And then once he gets off the bus, he follows the guy for a few blocks until he goes into his house. My mom's ex sent us the guy's address in case we needed to make a report to the police for trespassing. My mom's ex is a retired cop, so he's quite knowledgeable with this kind of thing. This made sense to me, so I wrote down the address. I will obviously not give it out here for privacy reasons, not for him, but to me, because he lives not too far from where we are. For the next month, we always looked up and down the stairwell before leaving the building. We were nervous to come back late at night because we didn't know if this man was really going to stick to his promise and come back and scare us when we were alone with only an 8-pound puppy to defend us. It's now June 15th, 2018, and thank God nothing ever came of this. When Pokemon Go first came out, I couldn't keep up with my then girlfriend, now wife at all. I would spend hours walking around town and somehow she would always manage to outlevel me. So the only way I figured I would get ahead would be to sacrifice my precious sleep and traverse the rough and tumble streets of downtown SLC until the wee hours of the morning. And with that, my journey to become a true Pokemon master began. Suck it, Ash and Red. I started staying out until 1 and 2 in the morning 5 nights a week since my work didn't start until around 10 or so, and I felt like I had enough time to recoup. And it worked great. Not only did I get ahead of her, but developed a massive lead, made some friends, and even dropped about 12 pounds as well. It was working great. Mostly. For anyone who doesn't know SLC, it is a pretty big problem with homeless people. A good number of them strung out on drugs or violently mentally ill. This isn't stereotyping, it's just a pretty well documented fact, both statistically and from my own experience. It's gotten somewhat better since the state stepped in to clean up downtown, but at the time, they were filtering up into the nicer areas of the city at night, and setting up camp or accosting people playing alone. As a result, I bought several knives which I would carry on me. One in my bag, one where most people hold a wallet, one in my pocket, and another on a belt loop. Yeah, it may have been overkill, but I wanted to be prepared for any situation. After all, I didn't need to win a fight. I just needed to make sure going after me was not worth their time. And after getting sized up by a rather surly looking group when I had simply stopped in to use a public bathroom by the state capitol, I decided it would be better to stock up than to be undergeared. Thankfully, I've never had to use it, but I have had to brandish it on more than one occasion. This is the creepiest time. One night, I'm walking back down the hill leading up to the Capitol when I see a guy on the same sidewalk a ways off, heading the opposite direction. At first glance, he seems harmless, but then I see him start twitching his shoulder uncontrollably and realize he's probably tweaked out right now. As he gets closer, I can hear him talking to himself. Nothing intelligible, but I think I at least heard him say something about kangaroos are controlled by Interpol. At least I think that's what he said. Just weird. Anyways, I had been so focused on listening to him that I hadn't noticed that he had realized I was there. He began to walk towards me with that sort of purposeful stride you have when honing in on someone. He was still probably a half a block away and I needed to cross anyway, so I figured then was as good as a time as any to part company. As soon as I had stepped 2 feet into the road, he follows suit and he picks up the pace, making a beeline right for me. I unfasten the knife from my belt loop and palm it just in case. He still shambles towards me and I realize that I've got one last chance to get out of this without conflict. When he's no more than 10 feet away, I flick out the knife blade, casually brandishing it at my side, and there is just enough light on me to make out that I'm armed. The guy stops in his tracks and just walks back to the side of the road as I continued my walk to the throng of people gathered at a small park, with 4 stops all lured up and hoping for a dragonite spawn. Sadly, that sort of dedication following such a creepy encounter didn't endear me to the gods of PG, enough to grant me one that entire summer. I freely admit that I could have been completely wrong about his intentions, but I wasn't willing to take that risk. Thankfully, I've never had another run-in like that again. Even on these subsequent nights I went out for binge playing, until the deep freeze of winter arrived. I've had some really weird encounters with homeless people here, including an overly aggressive panhandler who tried to come inside my apartment, and someone who thought walking in front of my car at a green light to keep me from going, so that he could beg for a ride to court. I'm absolutely not joking about this one. But nothing where I actually felt my life was potentially in danger like that night. In fact, my bad crap insane stalker act scared me more than the homeless do. However, that's an entirely different story for another day. This happened my senior year of college over a year ago. I lived in a college neighborhood, surrounded by other kids that went to my school, with the exception of a family or 2. We knew our neighbors well and everyone was fairly civil with one another. We did keep in mind though that this was a college area, and some sketchy things could happen. I think it was May when the first break-in happened. I woke up one morning to some texts in my group message telling me that my next door neighbor's house had been broken into. They had multiple things stolen. A backpack with a laptop and textbooks inside, a gaming console, etc. They had notified the police and they were on the case. This obviously set my roommates and I into a little bit of a panic because we were a house of 4 girls, and none of us being wildly brave by any means. We decided the best that we could do was to make sure our doors were locked at all times, whether we were home or not, and so that's what we did. Flash forward to a couple of days later. My roommate Maggie and I were the only 2 home out of the 4 who lived in our house. We stayed up late watching movies as we always did, and then I headed off to my room to go to bed, while Maggie stayed on the couch. We were, I'm not pleased to admit, the worst at turning off the lights and saving electricity. So this night, the light in the kitchen, living room, and hallway were all on. Sorry, I know, we got better about turning lights off eventually. I slept soundly through the night, and woke up as the sun shone through the cracks in my blinds the next morning. As usual, after I woke up I spent about 10 minutes in bed on my phone before getting up to use the bathroom. On my way back into my bedroom, I noticed that my blinds were tapping slightly against my window frame, suggesting that there was a breeze. My fan was off and my window was closed, so there should be no movement, right? Well, right, if my window had been closed. When I drew open my blinds, I was absolutely horrified to see that my bedroom window had been completely open all night, or at least since after I had gone to sleep. I knew that my window was shut when I went to sleep the night before, and there is something wildly unsettling about the fact that my bed is also pushed up on the wall right against my window. So perfectly, in fact, that I used to sit in my window on my bed, with my feet able to touch the grass below. That's how low the window is, and that's how close my bed is. Now at this point, I was frantic. I ran out into the living room to see if Maggie was okay and if she had noticed anything or heard anything throughout the night. She wasn't home, and I assumed she had gone to class. I texted her immediately explaining what had happened and asking her all of my questions. She responded lightning fast. She had woken up this morning in the living room, and when she walked into her bedroom to get ready for class, her window was open. Her desk, which sits right in front of her window, was pushed away from the wall, and her closet doors, which were always open because they jutted right up against the carpet, so they were pretty hard to open and close. They were closed. She said it looked exactly as though someone had pushed her desk away from the window to give themselves more room to enter quietly. In an absolute frenzy, I texted my other roommates, who hadn't been home, and my group message alerting them of what had happened. I crawled the house to see if any of my things were missing, and when my roommates came home later that day, they did the same thing. Nothing had been stolen, not even my laptop or my phone, which were both charging on my bed, right in front of the window. Not even Maggie's Apple Watch that was sitting on her desk in front of her window. We did call the police and they came to file the report, but they never followed up with us about it. I asked if they could dust my window for prints, as there had to have been handprints because the only way to open my window from the outside is to press your palms directly on the glass and push upward with significant force. But they never followed through with doing that either. I'm not sure really what to think of this, as maybe it was a planned break-in, but they didn't think I would be asleep in their point of entry. But they entered, we think, through another window nonetheless. So why didn't they take anything? And how did the sounds not wake us up? I was directly next to my window, so they would have had to jump over my body to enter my room. So I don't think they did enter from there at least, which is a little relieving. Maybe they didn't enter at all because the lights were all on, and they realized that people were home. But our cars were in the driveway, and it did seem as though they had entered because Maggie's closet doors were shut. This was bizarre to me. I'm just relieved that I've since moved out of that house. I'm pretty annoyed that the police didn't take it very seriously, but at least I'm also a little relieved that the people who broke in and I never had to meet. This happened a few years ago, in my old one-person flat. I had a strange feeling that something wasn't right for a few days. Like I was sure that food in the fridge was less than I had put back the last time. I found pillows from my couch on the floor and stuff like that. I lived alone back then, so there wasn't anyone else with access to my flat. Or so I thought. Well, one night I woke up at around 1 in the morning, sweating, and even though I didn't remember, I was sure that I had woken up from a nightmare. Since I was drenched in sweat, I decided to take a shower. So I put my phone up in the bathroom for music, turned on the water, and enjoyed my shower. A few minutes in, I heard the door move. I never closed it, but it still never moves. I took a look at the shower curtain and saw a shadow against it. And a look at my phone confirmed someone was there, since I could clearly see a reflection on my screen that showed someone standing next to the shower curtain. It took me a lot not to scream and to keep acting like I didn't notice anything, while silently taking the shower head off the holding and turning the water all the way to hot. I'm still kind of impressed of that quick thinking. Our water got really hot when you cranked it all the way to hot, and a few seconds later, steam was rising and the water hurt my feet, flowing to the drain. I turned around, ripped the shower curtain open, and held the shower head right at the person behind. It was a woman, and she screamed in pain. I whacked her in the face with the shower head and jumped out of the shower and ran to the door, taking the key out of the lock and locking it close behind me. A little later, she started banging on the door, but the door didn't give. Thank God. I called the cops and I went to the kitchen to get my big kitchen knife just for safety. I felt like my throat was closing up when I saw it missing, and realized there's only one place where it could possibly be right now. The police came and arrested the woman, who turned out to be the former person living in the flat and was evicted after not paying rent. It seems she had made a copy of the key and came into the flat when I was at work, and sometimes at night. It's possible that what woke me up in the first place was her, and honestly, I don't even want to think about it. Ever since then, I always insist that the locks are changed when I move into a new place. Hi everyone, I'm finally going to tell you all about what happened to me 4 years ago. At that time, I was 17, and I was living for a few years in a small house with my mom after my parents divorced 6 years ago. The house wasn't huge, but we had one floor with our bedrooms and a small garden. We also have a dog who isn't really scary. It's one of those small dogs with a lot of hair. His biggest default is that he barks a lot during the daytime every time someone is closed from the garden. That annoyed me and my neighbors a lot. It's important to notice that my dog never barks at night, and always sleeps with me in my bed. Anyway, one night in the middle of the night, I had a dream where I heard a constant dog barking. In my dream, I felt like it lasted 1,000 years, but I think it only lasted for a few seconds. When I woke up out of that nightmare, I didn't feel the weight of my dog on my feet. I felt like something was wrong and then realized my dog was actually barking and growling. I didn't understand what was happening. I just looked for my dog and saw him on the top of the stairs, his head turned towards the front door. The door opening the garage was actually on the side of the front door. I jumped out of bed and I rushed to the top of the stairs where my dog was. There was the shadow of a man standing just at the bottom of the stairs next to the front door. I wasn't even able to shout. I just took my dog in my arms by reflex and ran towards my mom's room. My mom was just waking up at this point. She takes medication to sleep, so it's very hard to wake her up. Thank God, the door to her bedroom could be locked with a key. Even though I was shaking like hell, I locked the door. My mom then understood what was happening when we heard footsteps coming from the stairs. We froze in the corner of her bedroom and she grabbed her phone to call the police. While we were trying to reach the cops, the guy started shaking the door handle and then punching the door. After a moment he stopped, and the psycho laughed. And that's when my mom had the good idea of shouting, "I called the police, get out." After a moment, we heard him going down the stairs, still laughing. We didn't dare to move until we heard the police officers. When they arrived, no one was there. In the kitchen, on the table, there was a note where he wrote, "See you soon." That's how I translated it because the original note was in French. They said later that apparently the guy got in and out by my garage, which has a back door that at the time we always left opened. Immediately after that, we went to living with my grandparents for a while, and moved out into a new house a couple months later. We never heard from this guy again, but we always check every door to make sure that it's locked before going to bed, and I've had trouble sleeping ever since. For almost a year after that, I waited until it was 4 a.m. to go to sleep, just to be sure he didn't find us and try to sneak into our home again. To give you a little background, I have a nervous tic where I laugh at the most awkward and inappropriate moments. I've always said that I would probably laugh even if someone is causing me physical harm. And now to the actual story. My family and I owned a small business in a not-so-great part of town. One day, I was just eating my sandwich and watching The Young and the Restless as I did every day with a coworker. Also, we were the only two there at the time. I looked up and I saw a figure peering through our display window, but I assumed they were just checking out the awesome display my mom put up there, because sometimes people only came to see what creative display she had come up with for that season. They suddenly opened the door and shut it, and I thought that was odd, so I stand up to see what's going on. And that's where I see a tall figure with a full-face bandana mask on, with only eyes and a mouth cut out. He comes through the door and demands us to give him the money. Naturally, I freak out, but I've always been told to just give them what they want and don't protest it, which is what I'd planned on doing. The next thing I know, my coworker stands up and says, "Run," as she is running towards the back. So I was like, okay, and I ran too. I went through the back door assuming she was right behind me, and I get all the way to the back of the driveway and I turn around to see that she's not there, so then I start panicking like, where is she? I'm just standing there like a dummy because I honestly don't even know what to do at this point, and I'm still trying to process what the heck just happened. I start walking down to the bank on the road beside us to tell them to call the cops since I left my cell phone inside. And then I hear a deep voiced man say, "Take me to the money," in a hateful tone. I turn around and there's a man pointing a gun at me, so I just say okay, while freaking out obviously, and I go with him. I then start laughing like some kind of crazy person and he gets agitated. He then yells at me to walk faster with the gun pointed at my back, so I tell him that I'm sorry, which why the hell should I be? So I give him the whole $50 that we had in our register, and he takes me to the back and tells me to stand there and count to 20. So I do what he says, and then I yell for my coworker trying to figure out where the heck she went. Like, did they have her or what? No worries though, she was safe hiding in the bathroom. The cops never found who did it, but they didn't actually seem too concerned since he only got $50. Never mind the fact that someone had to go through a traumatic experience. Also, a side note, I had posted on Facebook that I would probably say I'm sorry to someone even if they were trying to rob me 2 days before this happened. Luckily, this was a while ago, and I have less anxiety about it than I used to. Although, all these people wearing these bandana masks due to COVID put me on edge lately. So did the robber who held a gun on me for $50. Let's not meet again. First off, I'm not the greatest at telling stories, so please bear with me. I'm not sure if this belongs here since it wasn't exactly creepy, but extremely scary. When I was 14, I met a guy named James. He was 17. I dated him for 5 years. I'm 30 now. I grew up very poor to a teenage mother. I never met my father until I was 20. I made some pretty bad choices as a young lady. James was a big-time drug dealer, and at the time I found that thrilling and so cool. It was a typical abusive relationship. He cheated on me a lot, would physically, mentally, and emotionally abuse me. He would then buy me things or gave me money to make it all better. Unfortunately at the time, I didn't know any better or had a poor self-esteem. His money took me away from my poor home life, so I stayed for 5 years. This happened when I was 17. James and his brother Victor bought a house in a really nice neighborhood. Victor was a single guy, the player type. He had a random girl over visiting that night. James and I were going to bed. It was about midnight. Victor and his new girl left the house and took James' vehicle. James and I were alone in the house. About 2 minutes after Victor left, we heard a knock at the door. James gets up and says, "Oh, he must have forgotten his keys." I'm in bed and I hear James say, "You have the wrong house. Sorry, buddy." He comes running into the room, telling me to close the door. As we hear the door getting kicked down, 2 men enter the house. One was wearing a bandana over his face. The other guy I didn't recognize. He wasn't trying to hide his identity. They started kicking down the bedroom door as we did our best to hold our weight against it. We were screaming and begging them to leave. At one point, the bandana guy got his arm and leg through the door. I made eye contact with him. He dropped his sawed-off shotgun. I reached for it and he seemed to back off a little bit. The other guy grabbed the gun. Out of fear, I couldn't recognize him, but I felt something in the stare that he gave me. We thought they were after drugs and money. We had no weapons. The money and drugs were in a separate bedroom. They didn't take anything. It wasn't a robbery. They were there to give someone a beating. James was on the phone with the police the whole time this was happening. The guys took off. It was time to check what they took and hide the drugs. The police came, and we noticed a bullet hole in the wall in the bedroom, directly beside the room that we were in. I found out later it was caused by the bandana guy hitting the gun out of the other guy's hand as he tried to shoot me through the door. I went home the next day completely traumatized, not wanting to tell my family about anything that had happened. They all gossip. I walked in the door and my grandmother knew about the home invasion. My family knew James was a drug dealer and they weren't concerned. I thought at the time someone who James knew must have known someone in my family, since she had a female cousin tell her. My cousin, Anthony's wife, called me saying, "Anthony wants to say he's sorry, but you weren't supposed to be there." Again, I was dumb and assumed someone in the thug world had told them. We lived in a small city. I was so naive and was convinced it was a robbery from a rival drug dealer. That wasn't the case at all. We spent weeks waiting for them to come back, and James made sure he always had a few scary guys with guns in the house. I realize now that this only added to the trauma. A few months after this happens, I'm at James' house reading the newspaper. I see my cousin Anthony and another guy in the most wanted section. The other guy looked vaguely familiar. Anthony is gang-related. We're the same age and grew up extremely close. Although he got locked up at age 13, and had been on and off ever since, Anthony and I would write to each other. We had a strong bond. The phone rings and it's a girl named Cindy that is completely in love with Victor, but since he's a player, he treats her like crap. She brings up the mugshots in the paper and says, "That's your cousin, right?" She confesses to me that the home invasion was because of her. The other guy in the mugshot liked her. My cousin Anthony was his friend. They made her tell them where Victor lived, and they watched the house until they saw what they thought was me and James leaving. She was apologizing profusely, begging me not to tell James. I didn't. I knew if I told him, he would have her shot also because it was my cousin. I assumed I would get some blame or have to show James thugs where my cousin lived. Regardless of what he did, I'm stupidly loyal to my family. I saw Anthony at a family function a few years later. He said that he was sorry and that he loves me, and that it wasn't his fault. That was 13 years ago. My life is completely different now. I am an upstanding member of society, but I still feel a lump in my throat when I talk about it. As a 15-year-old girl who wasn't the shiniest coin in the jar, I very much craved the attention of guys. I didn't date at all until I went to college. No guy at my school really showed me any interest. The ones that I thought might never made a move either. So I found the Whisper app. On the Whisper app, you can anonymously post your thoughts and feelings where basically anyone around the world can see, as well as people who are only a couple of miles away. In fact, there's a separate tab to look at whispers from your area. You can heart people's posts, reply to them, or a direct chat with the person. You can choose what info about yourself is available to be seen when someone decides to direct message you, such as age and gender. I chose not to make that information public. I don't remember what I posted, but someone DM'd me. Their info didn't say much either besides their gender. I was obviously very naive and assumed that it was a guy my age who wanted to talk to me, because the words that he chose and how his messages were written made him seem younger. He asked some questions about how old I was, my interests, and what I did for work and so on. I answered those questions. He also asked to see a picture of me. I sent him a picture. He told me how beautiful I was and how I was way out of his league. He would dodge questions about himself. He would say that he was boring, and then he wanted to talk about me. I eventually managed to get him to send a picture of himself. You guessed it, a mid-40s man. I was surprised he sent an honest picture of himself, but at this point, I was understandably freaked out. He then started asking to take me out to dinner. I stopped talking to him at this point, but he kept trying to say stuff like, "I'll take you somewhere really nice. I'll throw in a massage." I figured out that you could block people, so that's what I did, and I didn't really think much of it after that. I basically forgot about the conversation after I fell asleep that night. A couple of weeks later, I was at work and it was slammed. The checkout line was starting to wrap around the small store that I worked at. There was only one line but 2 checkout registers at the counter at my work. I had just finished checking out a large order, and I kind of just looked up to see how bad the line was, and if it seemed if it was going to calm down soon. And that's when I made eye contact with a familiar face. I couldn't quite place it at first, and then the man smiled and silently mouthed, "Hi." The image he sent me in the chat immediately flashed to my mind, and I felt my stomach drop and my heart race. I was terrified and really didn't want to check this guy out. So I made sure to check out people way slower than I normally do. My coworker checked him out, but I could feel him staring at me. He even tried to wave me goodbye as he left, and I refused to even slightly turn my head in his direction. As soon as I calmed down in the store, I went to the bathroom and had a huge panic attack and nearly threw up. When my mom came to pick me up from work, I very closely watched the side mirror to make sure that we weren't being followed by anyone. After that day, I stopped answering direct messages if it wasn't someone who wanted to have an actual conversation about something that I had posted. Long story short, monitor your child's online activity. They may hate you for it at the time, but trust me, they need supervision. When I was about 16, I needed to get a job. I was out of high school and living with my parents who were driving me insane. I needed to get out. I was applying for jobs everywhere I could. I would walk into a store and immediately ask if they were hiring. I didn't care where I worked. I just needed the money to get out of my current living situation. The local grocery store was having a mass hire, job fair type deal on a specific day and time. I woke up early, got ready, and went. Everyone looking to get a job had to stand on a line and wait to be interviewed. No big deal. I just fumbled with my phone while I waited. The guy in front of me was standing sideways so he could easily face me and anyone behind me. He continually had asked me questions like, "Is this your first job? How old are you? How far would you have to drive to get to work here?" After the last one, I sarcastically told him that I didn't know he was the person that was supposed to interview me. I thought he got to the point because he stopped talking to me. We get up further in line, and finally he's being interviewed in this little office. It was really just a setup of tall pieces of cardboard that gave the illusion of privacy during your interview. It was set up right in front of the grocery store so anyone walking outside could see you during your interview. I was getting nervous because I really wanted the job. When he got done and came out, "Hope you get the job, cutie. I'd love to see more of you," he said as he walked past me. If it weren't for the interview coming up, I probably would have told him to get lost. Anyway, so I get into the makeshift cubicle, office, whatever. The guy hands me some papers and tells me to fill them out. I do so and I hand them back to him when I get done. When I lifted my head up, I saw behind the man interviewing me was the creep, outside the grocery store watching me during my interview. I was reasonably anxious before, but now I was starting to worry about this creep. I tried my best to make it through the interview without looking at him, and answer the questions that I'm being asked. But occasional glances towards him rewarded me with witnessing this creep groping the glass, having his hand down his pants, hopefully only acting, and finally taking pictures of me with his phone. I was ready to call the cops as soon as I got out of there if he was still around. When my interview was wrapping up, I was given some pamphlets and a gift card for a few bucks off groceries, shook hands with the interviewer, etc. When I looked back at the window, the guy was no longer there. Relief washed over me. I went to leave and hoped to God that I didn't mess up my interview. I walked through the grocery store front, back to the door that I had entered in, and shortly after walking outside, I saw him leaning up against the wall, and he saw me. He was waiting for me. I pulled my keys out and I put them in between my knuckles like I was taught to do at a young age, and my other hand went straight into my pocket, holding my phone. I started walking towards my car. When I passed him, he stepped to walk beside me. "So, how'd it go?" I said nothing. "You're really too cute to be working at a grocery store, you know. You can make a lot more money without even having to leave your house if you just went online." Disgusting, but still, I said nothing. "Oh, so you're gonna be like that? Not say anything to me? Probably a good idea because if you open that mouth, I would be tempted to stick my dick." I cut him off by swinging around towards him and punching him in the throat with my key fist. Unfortunately, my grip on the keys weren't tight enough, and they fell out of my hand on impact. But it was enough to shut him up and get him choking. I grabbed my keys off the ground and started running for my car. He was following me and shouting after me, calling me names and other vulgarities that I don't remember. I got into my car and I locked it just in time, as he slammed his hand down on my driver's side window. I was shaking like crazy, but I pulled out my phone and after a few feeble attempts from my shaking hands, I correctly dialed 911. He was pounding on my windows with open hands, shouting about how I had assaulted him, trying to open my doors, walking around the car to see if any of the other doors were unlocked. I tried my best to talk to the dispatcher and tell them where I was at, when he got back to my driver's side door and continued to pound on it and cuss at me. I held my phone up to the window so he could see the number that I had dialed and who I was on the phone with. On that note, his face went white, and he looked around and casually walked away. I waited a bit before telling the dispatcher that I think he was gone. They didn't want to have to send out a patrol if he had left already. The dispatcher got the description of the guy for me, and told me that they would have someone come out and look at the grocery store's camera footage, that they would talk to the guy who interviewed me to see if they could find out who the guy was. I never heard about the guy again, thankfully to my knowledge, as this is a grocery store I frequent. He didn't get the job, but unfortunately, neither did I. I had just turned 20 in March of this year, and had started to get out more on my own. I was always shy and never wanted to go out alone, but now I started to feel a bit more comfortable. I had just ordered myself a pocket knife. I actually have a few now, and I would carry it with me most of the time when I went for my daily walks. This one time in June was the one time I was blessed to have thought of bringing my pocket knife with me. It was around 8 p.m. when I decided to go for my walk. Usually, I would try and go in the morning or the early afternoon, but it had been raining all day, so my walk was delayed. I put on a light hoodie and was about to head out when I realized my knife wasn't in my pocket. I went back up and got it then and was on my way. My usual walk is about 3 to 4 miles, and I'm a fast walker, so I could cut the miles to about 2.5 hours max. I would take this side street to the main road that had a walkway for about half a mile before it turned into the suburban area. Before you hit the suburban area, there was this path that cut through a forested area that had a few cabins and parks. As I made my way, I noticed a figure hanging beside a tree on the far side of one of the cabins. I took a quick glance at him and continued past him. For your insight, I'm a trans male and I'm 5'1", so I would get mistaken a lot for a smaller 15-year-old kid. As I made it to the end of the path, I had noticed out of the corner of my eye that the man was about 15 feet away from me now. The dude was pretty tall, at least 6'3". He was well built and wearing torn jeans and a worn hoodie that seemed to be a bit too big for him. I began to speed up my walking as I turned the corner and shot a quick glance behind me. He was still behind me and just staring at me as he was making long strides towards me. At this point, I was beginning to freak out. He seemed to get closer with every step, and I quickly took a hold of my knife in my pocket and had my finger on the flipper. The next part has been burned into my memory for life. I felt a large hand grab my shoulder and pull me back. I have no clue how I managed to quickly whip around and flick open my knife and swipe it towards his face in just a few seconds, though it felt like minutes. The man, in a blink of an eye, jerked his face back, bringing up his hands as my knife sliced the palm of his hand. He let out a pained yell and fell back a few steps, clutching his hand. It felt like I had just scraped him, but his hand was already bloody, and a small pool of blood was starting to form at his feet. He looked at me with anger-filled eyes and then took off the other way. I stood there a few minutes before realizing what had just happened, and I went home as fast as I could to call the police. I answered their questions and then they took my knife to get a blood sample of this dude. I was shaken from this experience and stayed with my brother for a few nights. A few weeks later, the cops returned and told me that they had found the guy and that he was wanted for sexual assault. I was shocked and happy that they had found this dude, and my knife was also returned to me a few days later. When I was 15, I traveled with 2 friends, both 15 as well. We took the train to get to an event a few hours away. We were all interested in working in healthcare and went to a "What's it like to work in this field" event in another city. After the event had ended, we didn't have long to get to the train station to catch our train home, so we had pre-booked and I think prepaid for a taxi from the venue straight to the train station. This was in the days before Uber. When the event ended in the evening, it had finished slightly late. We rushed out to find our taxi. We approached one that appeared to be waiting for someone specifically, because we had seen the driver turn away other people, and said, "Is this the taxi for name to the train station?" The taxi driver said yes, and we all quickly jumped in. After 10 minutes of driving, my friend got a call from the taxi company, saying that our pre-booked taxi was back at the venue waiting for us. We realized that we were not in our booked taxi. I asked the driver to turn around, and he glared at me, aggressively saying, "No, I'm not doing that," and he locked the doors. We started protesting, telling him to stop and that this wasn't our taxi, that he had lied to us that it was our taxi, but he refused to stop. My friend panicked and started hyperventilating and whispering, "He's going to kill us." Probably an overreaction, but we were young and far from home. He started shouting that he wasn't going to let us out and that we were in his car now. Eventually, I threatened to call the police, at which point he braked sharply and told us to get out. He left us at the side of the road and sped off. The road was deserted, it was dark, a winter evening, and we were all pretty freaked out. My friend called the booked taxi, and they picked us up and took us to the station. We didn't manage to get the other taxi driver's plate number or any information from the car. In retrospect, I'm not sure if he meant us harm. I think he just wanted to complete the journey and get paid. But we were 3 young, 15-year-old girls far from home, and he really panicked us by behaving so aggressively and locking the doors. Now in my mid-20s, I always carefully check the number plates on the Uber app to make sure that it's the right car. I have a wedding to go to tonight, but desperately needed some new underwear. I decided to go to the store to just make a quick selection and leave. I get to the ladies section, and just as I start browsing, I see a man in his late 50s, early 60s turn into the aisle. He pulls up beside me and stops. His closeness immediately grabs my attention, and I start to feel on edge. "Hi," he says. I mutter a greeting back. I'm trying to focus on browsing and get out of there. "How are you?" He was looking right at me. There isn't anything in his rain-soaked cart. He isn't looking at the product, just at me. "I'm okay. You?" I asked hesitantly. I figured maybe he's not from around here and is going to ask me to point him in the direction of something that he needs. It happens a lot to me. My cart is all wet. I turn to look at him. He's leaning on his cart. It's dripping on the floor. "I hope it's sanitizer." He chuckles, looking at my face mask. "Probably the rain," I say. I mean, it's been raining non-stop for 3 days here. So now I'm thinking that he was dumb because carts don't drip sanitizer like that. "I don't mean to freak you out, but I saw you and I had to track you down. I sometimes notice attractive people." He trailed off. He looks me up and down. I'm a 26-year-old female, and I look like a train wreck. I kind of step away and mutter, "Thank you?" I immediately hated myself for saying that. I didn't want to be polite. I started looking around for other people, but there isn't any nearby. He looks me up and down one more time, and then steps back out of the aisle and disappears without saying another word. I then text my husband about what happened, and found an employee and let them know what had happened as well. They said they hadn't heard anything like that happening before, but would be sure to keep an eye out. I don't know if he was just trying to give me a compliment or try something more, but it was a creepy encounter for me, and it made me feel really gross and slimy. I hope he doesn't track down someone else. I've read the sub for a while, but never figured that I would have anything to post. But something wild happened to my girlfriend and I at Burger King a couple of weeks ago. It wasn't necessarily creepy, but definitely scary. Here we go. We ordered a bunch of food, got our drinks, and sat down at the table near the corner of the restaurant. A minute after we order, a guy goes up to the counter and orders. He wasn't out of place, so I didn't notice anything about him for a few minutes. He sits down where you would typically sit if you are waiting for a to-go order, and the first thing that got our attention was, as a kid, maybe 8 or 9 years old, ran past him. He loudly says, "Atheist," at the kid in an accusing tone. He then was milling about, talking into a radio-like box about how he needed to move to the North Pole. It was seconds after this that I noticed he was staring at us. as I made brief eye contact with him several times to check that he was indeed staring. He then walked over and sat at a table right next to my girlfriend and I. Great. He then starts babbling to some imaginary person, saying, I don't know. Homeless and mentally ill are pretty common in this area, especially this side of town, so we are on edge, but not surprised at his behavior. The lady working calls for order 179. The guy says, they were before me, motioning to us since he apparently forgot his number. The lady says, 2 cheeseburgers, and he again insisted that it might be our food. But this time I realized what was happening, and I said, oh yeah, we are 178. At this point, he snapped and totally lost it on me. You Californians need to learn to open your mouth. As he grabbed his food and began walking in my direction to the exit. I mustered up what fight or flight response I had in the moment to say. Have a nice day, see ya. As he approached the door, and the crazy guy continued to cuss at me, calling me names and so on. A few more words were exchanged, but I made sure to stand my ground by not saying anything off color as he made his way out. As he left, he apparently continued to scream at us through the window. All the employees and customers in the place were looking at me in shock, and I was shocked too. The part that bothers me about this interaction is that in the moment as he walked past me, I saw in his eyes how removed from reality he was. Whether that was because of drugs or mental illness, or a combination. He was also much larger than me, so if he wanted to hurt me or my girlfriend, he likely could have. I just remembered this. It's one of those memories that isn't extremely terrifying enough to remember, but it's eerie enough to stay in your mind for a good while. I would say I was about 13 years old when this happened. At the time, I lived in a small town, and there was a girl who was a few years younger than me that had gone missing. It had been a big deal and they had found her body, and while apparently she had been tortured before her death, it was a big deal. Obviously, it made parents paranoid about who they let their children be around. And so back to my experience. My mom took me to Burger King. It was close to our apartment and we went there the days that she was too tired from work to cook. She went to get the food and I sat at the booth playing with the paper for my straw, and this man came in and came up to me. It was like he came into the building and looked around until he spotted me, and then came over to where I was sitting. The guy, I don't think that he was homeless, and maybe he was. He had this odd smell to him and his clothes were ripped and dirty. He kept his hands stuffed in his jean pockets and kept moving them around and swaying back and forth, while standing and looking down at me, and he kept smiling and it was so creepy. I just sort of smiled at him and said, "Hi," and I hoped that he would go away, and figured he couldn't do anything because it was a small building full of employees, and my mom was just a few feet away. Note, my mom didn't notice the guy yet. He started talking to me. I remember that, and he had the kind of voice that makes you feel gross. He just stared at me and was talking about the girl who went missing and was found dead. It wasn't like a casual topic. He had this glint in his eyes that was exciting to him, what had happened, and exciting for him to be talking about it to a young girl. He started on about how he heard that what had happened to the girl was all about sex, which when you're very young and some creepy man who hasn't bathed in probably weeks is saying things about sex to you, and the way that he said it was so intense, it was just freaky. Like the whole situation is messed up, and I was creeped out and this guy was standing very close to me, like blocking my side of the booth. It was like he knew that if he didn't stand nearly pressed to my side, that I would get up and leave this charming conversation. Thankfully, before he could tell me anything more about what he was thinking, my mom noticed him and came over asking him what the hell he wanted and why he was talking to me. He got wide-eyed, jumped away and laughed. A few employees ran out after him to see who he was, what he looked like. because they were caught between wanting to call the cops and make sure to never let him into the building again. I remember being shaken up really badly. My mom was freaked out. She had plans on buying me mace and all sorts of things after that incident. The thing is that, after that, I was paranoid that I'd run into him again. Small town, that stuff happens. Like a few times I swear I saw him riding a bike when I would be in the car with my mom. And another time I thought I saw him in a shop that we were in. Of course I was young, he was gross. And I was paranoid, so I doubt I really did see him. It was late at night. I'm not sure of the exact time, but I'm going to guess around midnight. And for some reason, my best friend, Lainey, and I decided to go for a walk. I really can't remember why. Probably to go to the 24-hour pharmacy to get drinks, or maybe just pass the time since there's really nothing to do at that time of night. And she was staying at my house for a few weeks. But we did. We were walking up my street in the direction of wherever we were going. We got decently far up and everything seemed fine. I didn't have a purse on me or anything, but Lainey did. So when we saw a man wearing baggy pants and a bright red hoodie, with the hood up and a hand in his pocket walking towards us, we went single file to one side of the sidewalk, and I went first, as we didn't want the one with valuables to be in front. Once we got past him, Lainey told me that she had a bit of a bad feeling. She turned back to look at him and I looked at her, and I could clearly see that she didn't look happy, and so I looked back too. And just as I did, I watched him stop walking as well. He mirrored our actions and turned to look at us, and he stared in our direction. A few seconds passed of us just staring at each other, and so Lainey and I broke the moment as we turned and kept walking the way we were. She said that she still had that bad feeling after a few steps, so we both turned our heads back again, and he was now walking in our direction. There were, if I remember correctly, maybe 5 meters between us, and the second we realized he was walking, we turned to keep going as well. Thankfully, we were near an intersection. When we got to it, we turned to check again, and sure enough, he was still coming our way. So we turned right onto Apple Street. We went up it for a bit and checked again, and you guessed it, he was still following us. So we kept going up Apple and crossed the street halfway up to a stop at a Burger King. It was closed since it was so late, but the lights around implying that there were workers inside cleaning and closing up, and there were 2 cars in the parking lot. We felt like we could just wait it out there, as people were around, and so that was what we decided to do. Once we got to the Burger King parking lot, we looked back and he was cutting diagonally up this field space towards us. We went to the opposite side of the BK, and now we were on a different street, called Orange, and went up it to the right, the direction that we were going on Apple. We got to the top of the street and looked back, and nobody was there. So we turned right under the street that connects Apple and Orange, called Banana. We went along it towards Apple and then back down Apple towards where we came from originally. We got a bit down it, and Lainey said that she had that bad feeling again. We look around and he's standing on the corner of Banana and Apple. We run back down Apple to BK and look back once more, once we get there. It looks like he's going further up on Apple, and therefore away from us. Which is clearly good, but we don't feel safe enough to go home yet, so we stayed there for about 20 minutes. During this time, this is irrelevant to the story, but it still upsets me to this day. A car pulled up to us and asked if we were okay, because I guess we looked clearly shaken. Lainey said yes, but the man was following us and we didn't know what to do. The guy in the car looked around and didn't see anyone, and said to call the police then, before promptly driving off. No, yeah, let's just call the police. There's a strange man following us, but he's been gone for 15 minutes now. No, he never harmed us. Yeah, he stayed about 5 to 10 meters behind us the whole time. No, he never even talked to us. I would tell them. They'll sure treat that as a top priority and send people out straight away. Anyway, after a little longer, we felt like it was about time to head back home since he didn't seem to be returning. We were standing in the BK parking lot closest to Orange Street, and we were just doing our double checks around to make sure that he was gone. Lainey was looking towards Apple and I was looking towards Orange. The fear I felt in this moment is one that I can't describe. There is some big trees against the building on Orange side, and remember, it was dark out. And Lainey is not paying attention to Orange. Thank God I was. I see a figure slowly emerge down the street from the tree canopy. And they're wearing red, the only color that I can see, with their hood up and a hand being put back into their pocket. I don't even want to know what he had. I inhaled sharply and immediately grabbed Lainey's arm on instinct and yanked her as hard as I could as I charged off towards Apple Street. The adrenaline made me forget the exact, finite details of every movement in this moment, so I don't know for sure if she protested or not. All I know is that I was pulling her towards Apple Street as hard as I could, and to this day, I say it's a true testament of how much I care for her, since she knows in situations like this, people can leave others behind to save themselves. And honestly, I know my care for her is what made me react that way because I'm the type of person to freeze in fear, unless someone I care about is in danger as well. The figure went all the way up Apple to the next block, turned left to the connecting street between Apple and Orange, not Banana as it's a new block now, and came back down it again. The drive-thru Burger King is on the Apple side. I yank her over there and throw her with me against the drive-thru wall, as it's at an angle that gave us cover from him going down Orange. We pressed against the wall, waited a little, and then peeked around the corner and he was just going past a building down Orange. Until then, I lost sight of him. We were panicking very badly now. We waited a little longer, maybe 5 minutes, and then decided to check if he was gone again. Lainey didn't want to move in case he started coming towards us on Apple, and when you go to Orange, buildings block your view of it, so she stayed there while I went over to Orange. I looked up it and down it and he was nowhere. Relieved, I turned to start walking back towards Lainey, but as I turned to do so, I caught sight of him. He was coming straight for me, diagonally and through the field between Apple and Orange's buildings, just like he had when we got to BK the first time. He was about 15 to 20 meters away. Frozen, I turned to Lainey fully. She was far from me but was close enough to see my expression, and I could see hers. I pointed frantically in his direction, and she looked confused but scared, which told me that she hadn't noticed him. I was mouthing, "It's him," but she only looked more confused, so I could tell she wasn't reading my lips properly, probably due to the distance. In panic, with no other conceivable option, I started running towards her and waving her over. Complying, she started running to me. As she did, she noticed him and ran faster. We met in the middle of the parking lot. By this point, he was very close to us, and the 2 cars in the parking lot were still there. As one faces the cars from our current position, on the left, there was a man in his, and on the right, there was a parking space between the 2 cars, where 2 teen boys were in theirs. We darted to and around the teen boy's car as it was closest and sat in front of it, our legs under to shield ourselves as much as possible. By this point, I was visibly shaking, and Lainey was full on crying, like sob crying. She was trying to keep quiet, but you could tell even from inside the car that we were in trouble. And I knew the boys noticed because they looked at us in shock and then behind them to see what we were looking at, and just stared at the man, immobile. Now as we're sitting in front of the car, we can't see him because he's adjacent to us with the car blocking our vision. I'm sitting on the left while she's sitting on the right, so she's on the side that he would emerge from when he entered her view. I couldn't see him unless I went around the car or sat up, while she could just peek to the side. which he did as he kept going to Orange, which made her shove herself into me in an attempt to get out of his view once she saw him. Sadly, this blot didn't pin me under the car a little, and I couldn't move as she was on my legs. We were trying to keep silent due to the fact that if he decided to look to his right, he could clearly see us. But she was crying harder now and I was trying to get her off of me so we could dart to the man's car. Eventually, she got the message, after the initial fear and shock of seeing him that froze her in place wore off. So she sat back so I could move, and we ran to the far side of the man's car. During all of this, by the way, all three people in their cars were looking from us, to the guy, to us, and to the guy, doing absolutely nothing. Not even asking if we were okay or showing any emotion other than vague curiosity. As two 17 to 18-year-old girls are sobbing and shaking, and literally doing Mission Impossible shit around some cars in the dead of night, with a hooded figure in view, only a few meters away. I'll never forgive those people, and it's why I still think we were technically in danger. Because if the man decided to turn and charge at us, there's nothing we could have done. And I strongly doubt the boys or the man in the cars would have done anything either. We sat there for a little, peeking over the top of the car, until the man turned and went up Orange towards Banana. As soon as we lost sight of him, we decided it was time to go, because clearly every time we thought he was gone, we were sorely mistaken. And so we shot up, went back down Apple, and booked it all the way home. We never saw him again and made a vow to never go out at night again. Never have, and I never will unless I have a male with me. And I picked up a pocket knife and a pin alarm. You pull out the pin and the device shrieks, only stopping when that specific pin is put back in, shortly thereafter. They're still in my purse and will never be taken out. So, I went to Burger King and forgot to grab my drink in the drive-thru window, but it was too late to reverse. So I go to the front, park my car close to the entrance, and leave the car on to quickly grab my drink and leave. The only reason that I left it on was because my mom was with my child in the back seat, which is where my mom normally sits to entertain my baby while I drive. My windows in the back are tinted so you can't really see anyone back there unless you're close up, and it was kind of dark out. I got my drink and went to my car in less than half a minute, and I see this guy who was close to my driver door, and he quickly turns when he sees me, kind of startled, and asked if I can spare any change, and I said no, sorry, and I quickly got into my car. When I pull out, this girl goes to him and they're both whispering something, and staring at me like they were up to something. I quickly got this gut-wrenching feeling that his intentions were bad, and if I hadn't been there as quick as I was, he could have taken my car with my mom and the baby in the back. Maybe he noticed my mom in the back and quickly changed his mind when he got close. I don't know, but I'm so glad it didn't happen. My mom said she obviously wouldn't have left without the baby, but who knows what he would have been capable of. From now on, I always lock the car when I leave, and take the keys out if my mom decides to stay in while I grab something really quick. So, I'm an expat and I live in Serbia. I forgot all about the dead drop man until a few nights ago. Last winter, my boyfriend broke up with me and I was in a bad state. I'm a loner and I prefer to be alone when I'm in pain. While recovering from his betrayal, I took up a new hobby: people watching. I live on the second floor, first floor for the other Americans out there, and my balcony overlooks a courtyard with a tree, a basketball court, and an old, disused bomb shelter. For some reason, the bomb shelter windows are always open, even though the entrance is always chained and locked shut. I'm a night owl, so that winter, I watched local dudes come to the courtyard basketball court and drink, smoke, and chill out. I started to notice that early in the morning, usually around 2 or 3 a.m., a man would come and go to one of the bomb shelter windows, and collect an envelope or a package from it. Sometimes the envelope was thin, like it was filled with documents. Sometimes it was thick, like it was filled with something larger like wads of cash or whatever else. One night I was rather drunk. I forgot all about the dead drop man and sat on my balcony in one of the chairs. I had just discovered an old joint in my cupboards while cleaning earlier in the afternoon. I planned to go on the balcony and pack the contents of the joint into a pipe and smoke it. I sat outside, pretty oblivious to the cold at this point, because of my numerous gin and tonics. The lights around the courtyard were dim, but I could still see. I saw the dead drop man come. Too drunk to care at this point, and my vision already spinning. I lit up my pipe. It was like a sharp crack in the night. The dead drop man quickly snapped his head around to look at me. The tree outside was bare, so I knew he could see me. I saw him for the first time. He was a bit older from what I could see, but still young, maybe in his 40s. His face wasn't anything spectacular, and I've never been good with faces. However, I remembered his face. He turned around and quickly grabbed the newest envelope from where it was tucked into the window and went on his way. I didn't see him again for a long time. As I said, I had pretty much forgotten about the dead drop man until a few days ago. I don't have AC, so at night, I keep the balcony door open. This is a safe neighborhood in a safe city, so I usually think nothing of it. A few days ago, I learned pretty late that I had an online interview. I took off my clothes except for my panties, and washed my hair under the tap in the bathtub. I used my hairdryer and then sat down with my purse that desperately needed cleaning out. And that's when I heard something hit the metal rail of my balcony. At first, I shrugged it off. The second time, though, I went out to look. Picture me standing in my underwear on the balcony looking for whatever dingus hooligan decided to throw rocks at my apartment, ready to hurl insults in both English and Serbian. Instead, under the dim light, I saw the dead drop man standing near my balcony, as if he was about to do some cheesy movie stunt and play a boombox. Although I've never been good with faces, I recognized him instantly. What followed was one of the weirdest and scariest conversations I'd ever had in my life. Everybody in the neighborhood knows that I'm foreign, and has a good idea of where I live, so it wouldn't be hard to find my balcony or my apartment. I wasn't concerned with my almost complete nudity. His eyes weren't on my tits. They were staring directly in my eyes. He said in heavily accented English, "What did you see?" There was a tense moment where I thought of what to say. People have often complimented me on my silver tongue, and I felt that I knew how to answer him correctly. "I didn't see anything. I don't even know who you are." We stared at each other for what felt like a minute, but it could have been less. My heart was pounding. Eventually he just said, "Good," and turned around. He walked away. I hope my answer was satisfactory, because I don't want to see the dead drop man again. So, about 2 years ago, a friend of mine had moved into his own apartment. The sofa that was in it was old and worn, so he decided that he would try and find another one in better condition. He asked me to help him look for one as my dad had a van, and we would need to use that to transport the sofa. So we went on Craigslist to have a look at what other people had for sale. We came across one ad that stated, "A 3-seater cream leather sofa, great condition, free to a first viewer." There was a picture of it and it looked in perfect condition. Now the ads had been up for a week, so we had thought that maybe it was already gone, and that they just hadn't taken the ad down yet. So my friend contacted the seller and nearly instantly got a reply saying that they still had the sofa and it was available if we would like to collect it. I was a bit weary that it was still available. I mean, a free sofa in perfect condition that had been up for a week and nobody has taken it yet. We thought that maybe there was something wrong with it that could only be noticed when viewing the sofa, that was maybe hidden from the pictures. It was a weekend and we had no plans, so we decided that we could go and check out the sofa. My friend contacted the seller back and organized a time and a place to meet up. They decided on a local McDonald's car park at 9 p.m. as the seller said that he was in work until 8 and would need time to get ready after work. The seller said that he would be driving a green Honda Accord with a trailer. So we pulled up to the McDonald's car park at about 8:50 p.m. There were loads of people around, so we had no reason to think that we would be in danger or anything. At 8:55, my friend got a text saying that the seller was about 15 minutes away, and they asked him to describe what vehicle we were in, so he described the van that we were in to him. About 5 minutes after he had texted the seller what vehicle we were in, an overweight man around 50 years old with a gray scruffy beard and greasy gray hair approached the driver's side window of the van, which was my side, as I was driving the van. He was wearing a plain white t-shirt with looked like food stains all over it, with black jeans with holes torn in them, and dried mud stains all over them, along with a pair of black steel toe cap boots also covered in dry mud. He knocked on my window, so I rolled it down a bit. "You boys here for the sofa?" he said in a gravelly voice. It sounded like he needed to cough, but he couldn't get it out. Yeah, I said to him. Rob's car broke down just on the road and his phone battery died. I was with him, so I walked up to get you guys. He was with the car waiting for AA, but you can come down and collect the sofa off of him. Me and my friend looked at each other, unsure of what to think. "Can I get in the van and we'll go back to Rob together?" the guy asked. "How far down the road is he?" I asked before he replied. "Not too far, but I need to show you where to go." At this stage, my friend pretended to get a phone call. "Hello?" "Yes, no way, really. We'll be right there," he said before pretending to hang up his phone. He looked at me and said, "Hey man, we gotta go. My dad needs us to help him with his flat tire." I nodded, knowing that it was a fake call for us to get the hell away from this creepy guy. "Hey, we gotta go now, but we'll contact you tomorrow about the sofa." The guy just stared at us as I rolled up my window and started to drive away. Me and my friend looked at each other. Well, that was creepy. I got bad vibes off of that guy, my friend said. "Definitely," I replied to him. We decided to drive around the back of the car park to see if we could find out if the guy was up to something or not. And we could see him standing in the same spot where we left him, and he was on the phone. He put his phone down, and about 2 minutes after that, a car pulled up with 3 men in it and he got in. My friend's phone started ringing, and it was the number of Rob, the guy who supposedly was giving away the sofa. He answered. "Hey, can you meet tomorrow and I can hold onto the sofa for you until then?" As he was on the phone, I noticed one of the men in the car that had collected the creepy guy was also on the phone. My friend told Rob that he would contact him tomorrow, that he was busy and he couldn't talk right now. At the same time that my friend hung up on the phone, the guy who was in the car also finished his phone call. At this point, I explained that to my friend that there was probably no car that had broken down, and the creepy guy was trying to lure us somewhere so as the guys in the car could do God knows what to us. We drove home and my friend blocked the number of Rob, and we've never heard from them again. We reported the ad and it was removed the next day. I have a couple memories of being abroad at various times that I didn't think about it at the time that could have gone bad, but didn't turn out that way. I'm currently 25, but when I was newly 16 in 2011, I went to China on a 10-day trip for high school students sponsored by a local Midwestern university. On one occasion, we were in a large market on the basement level of a shopping center in Beijing. I can't remember exactly where. We were supposed to be using the buddy system, and I was buddies with a boy that I had stayed friends with over the years. While looking around the large market, we got separated for a few minutes visiting different stalls. but I just assumed my friend was close by and could see me. I walked into a shop stall by myself to look at some of those tacky souvenir canvas bags that you can find in any major city. I browsed for a couple minutes, not paying attention to the fact that I was the only one in the stall when a small, middle-aged Chinese woman came up to me and grabbed me tightly around the arm. In broken English, she told me that she had more purses and bags in her secret shop, and started pulling me towards the back of the store. Taken aback, I said I didn't want to look. In front of me, a man was pushing open a door at the back of the wall that had bags hanging all over it that would have appeared to be part of the display. I just remember being incredibly confused and hesitant. She was holding onto my arm so tight that it hurt, while pulling me forward, and I just remember in that moment looking around quickly. And then I see my 6'2" tall male friend running over. He came and grabbed my other arm, and when she saw him, she immediately let go, walked off, and the man shut the door. I don't know what exactly was going on, but I do know that I was very young and naive at the time, and that I am very fortunate to have had a watchful friend. When I was 20, I spent a semester abroad in Copenhagen as well. I lived in a house in a suburb just north of the city, and I had spent the evening having some drinks with friends in the city center. I was the only friend who lived in that direction, so I got in the S train by myself. I did this every day to get to and from class, and to go home. A male friend offered to go with me, but I didn't want to inconvenience him with an extra trip, so I declined. The train ride was 20 to 30 minutes, and at the second stop, a dark-haired, middle-aged man sat down across from me. Even though I had been drinking, I wasn't drunk, and by this point in my life, I had learned to be a little more careful of my surroundings. I busied myself with my phone, and he asked me how I was in Danish. Many people assumed I was because I am pale and blonde. My barely passable Danish was even worse if I had had any alcohol, so I apologized and said that I only spoke English. He said that he was Spanish and he didn't speak much English himself. I just smiled and nodded, hoping that he would understand that we couldn't talk. However, he kept trying to ask me questions though. I decided to be polite and asked him how he was doing in my incredibly poor Spanish. He took this as an invitation to ask more questions, and I could barely understand a thing. He was visibly frustrated I couldn't converse with him, and then tried to ask if I was with friends or if I was from here. Subtle red flags. I thought about getting off the train early, but I didn't want to get lost. I had only been here a few weeks at this point. 10 minutes later, I got to my stop and I got off the train. I very much noticed that he also got off the train just before the door closed. Usually, I walked home. It was a 15-minute walk from the station to my house, and on normal days, it was a pleasant walk through a residential neighborhood. He followed me through the tunnel under the tracks to the other side, and luckily, a city bus was outside the station. I immediately got on, showed the driver my pass, and sat right behind him. It was late at night and I was the only one on the bus. This driver must have been perceptive and understood something was amiss, because he looked at me and asked in English, not Danish, where my stop was. I told him and he closed the door right after. As the bus pulled away, I saw the Spanish man standing outside of the station, staring at me through the windows. He turned away and walked back through the tunnel under the station towards the platform. Both experiences were a combination of good timing and understanding people, but it is frustrating to think that I should have had the help of a male friend in these scenarios. The world isn't always a friendly place. Both of my stories happened in the summer of 2018, when I was working as a facilitator in a recreation center for children, small sections up to first grade. We were in a kind of park about 20 minutes away by bus where we stayed all day, before going back to school at about 5 p.m. so that the parents could pick up the children. This park was reserved for us and therefore nobody else than us. Our managers and those who take care of the canteen are not supposed to be there, especially since around it there are only fields, a forest and a building site, but it was quite far. Now that the context has been set, I'll begin the first story that happened to my colleague. We had walkie-talkies for the day, which allowed for us to reach our managers, the secretary, or the infirmary in case of a problem, but they were returned when it was time to leave to be recharged during the night. So, it was up to the secretary, my colleague, who was the last one to leave at around 7 p.m., to put them on the charger and then close the shutters and doors and go home. One morning, I think it was the 8th day, I had been working for a month with the children. We all find ourselves summoned one by one to the office of our leaders, so I go there without really understanding what is going on. I pass in front of the secretary, who doesn't look serene at all, and that worries me a bit. My senior manager asked me if I had returned my walkie the day before, or if I knew someone who had taken one. I say that I did return mine by pointing it at the charging station, and explain that I didn't hear anything else. I still asked why I'm being asked this question, and then my manager tells me. The night before at around 7 p.m., as she was about to leave, my colleague was closing the shutters when one of the walkie-talkies lit up, and a male's voice came out saying, "Hey, beauty of the Isles, you're beautiful when you close those shutters." I had a vile shiver go down my spine, my colleague being the only foreigner on the team. The person who had spoke to her had to be looking at her and really talking to her and not a hoax. At the time, she had called her roommate who had come to pick her up and left every other day with someone, and we never heard from that guy again. Nevertheless, we patrolled for several days to try to notice someone, for our safety but especially for the children's safety. The second story takes place in the third and thus the penultimate week of work. It is around 11 a.m. when I am called on the talkie by my manager. She tells me that something very strange has happened. I ask her what it is, and again, I could feel this shiver of anguish. A man had come to the secretary and asked to see me using my first and last name. My manager had gone to see me because she thought it was strange, because nobody is supposed to show up at my workplace, and apart from my parents and friends, nobody knew I was there. This man had then introduced himself as my uncle, and that he had come to pick me up for personal reasons. My manager said that I was not on site. That wasn't true, and that she would let me know that he had come by. According to her, he looked very annoyed and left without giving his name. You could say it was a plausible story, but I only have one uncle who was my godfather, who doesn't fit the description of the man who came in, and to whom I don't talk at all. I never heard from this man again, and I've never seen him, but I still have this bad feeling that someone I don't know forged an identity to come and get me. Who knows what would have happened if I had gone. I am grateful to my manager who knew how to smell the trouble. In order to really paint the picture for you of the scariest event I have ever experienced in my entire life, and to really feel that moment when my blood turned to ice in my veins, I've got to give you a little background on my rather unconventional and messed up childhood. I'll try to keep this part brief. I'm sure this will sound like some utter BS to some, but I assure you that it's not. I'm telling the absolute truth, even if it does sound like a badly produced after-school special. My father kidnapped me from my mother when I was a baby, not because he loved me and couldn't live without me, but because he's a sociopathic douchebag that wanted to hurt my mother as much as he could. I was missing for roughly 6 years, face on the back of a milk carton, the whole nine. My father was an ex-military survivalist that smuggled drugs over the Mexican-American border among other things at that time. During these most formative years of my development, I was surrounded by criminals and raised by this neglectful douche. I had a lot of severe trauma very young. Let's just say that I knew what real monsters were. By the time I was located and returned to my mother just after I turned 7, I knew how to load, clean and assemble several different types of guns. I knew how to aim for the head of the men wearing blue uniforms, and I was a dang good shot with a handgun. I had been left alone for days at a time, repeatedly and often, so I was completely self-sufficient and I could care for myself. I didn't go to school and I had only been around other kids for very rare, brief moments in time. I was a feral little beast at this point. I did not trust adults or anyone for that matter. In my experience, most people were liars and did not show their true face. And lucky for me, I was returned to a loving home with my mother and stepfather. With love, therapy, and protection by the two of them, I think I turned out to be a relatively normal and surprisingly mentally healthy woman, albeit with a few idiosyncrasies. Now the point of all of this preamble is to give you some context regarding the kind of person that I am. I am not a victim. I don't take crap from people, and there are very few things in this world that truly terrify me. I'm a freaking survivor. Growing up the way I did, I studied people intensely as a defense mechanism. I'm very good at reading people and their emotions, at times even the feelings they won't admit to themselves. I have been left with an obsession for my security and of those who I love, so I tend to be hyper-vigilant of my surroundings. This is always a weapon of some type on my person, or in my belongings wherever I go, and I take note of every exit and entrance of any place I step into. As a teenager, my stepfather taught me some tricks on how to take down someone that was bigger and or stronger than me. He was a hell-raising biker and at one time, a bartender and a bouncer at a rowdy biker bar, so he knew his stuff. You would think I would be prepared, right? The story that I am trying to get to here was one of the few times in my adult life that someone had slipped through all my defenses and nearly got to my young daughters. Now, it's one thing to fear for your own safety, but to fear for the safety of your children, as I'm sure every parent knows, is something else entirely. It is ice cold, blood-curdling, absolute sheer terror, and I never ever want to experience it again. I was living in San Francisco roughly 7 years ago. At the time, I managed a medical office inside a large residential drug rehab center. The residents were a mix of characters ranging from the homeless and mentally ill to straight out of San Quentin parolees. I actually enjoyed my work and never felt unsafe there, but it was exhausting. It was Friday at the end of a 50-hour work week and I could not wait to get home and put my feet up. The building that I worked in was donated by the Catholic Church and used to be an old convent. It is a 4-story stone behemoth and I ran up and down 3 of those floors all day every day that week. It had been a rough week and I was deep to the bones tired as well as mentally fried. It was no quick commute home for me, however. My job was in the Fillmore, Lower Heights area and my babysitter lived near Balboa Park, while I lived in the Sunset District next to SF State. The fastest way home involved walking 2 city blocks to get to a bus, which would drop me off near the closest underground station. From there, hop on a train that would take me all the way across the city, nearly to the end of the line. At least the babysitter didn't live far from the line, so I didn't need to transfer to another bus. Once I had my girls, I would have to wait for the next train to head back down the M line and finally, a 15 to 20 minute trek on foot to the back of the small city-sized complex where our apartment was. I had made it to the babysitter's house uneventfully and stood waiting for the next train, counting the minutes down until we would be at our front door. This was an above-ground stop, so my habit was to hold the hand of my 7-year-old and heft my 3-year-old toddler on my hip, clamber up the steps and carry her through the train to find a seat. Although she was able to walk, she wasn't so balanced on a moving subway train as well as being a toddler, so she tended to fall over and become easily distracted by the other people on the train. Strollers seem to be more of a pain in the ass than they are helpful when dealing with public transit, so this became my routine. Looking back, I'm sure I looked like an easy target. It's not like I present as this badass, hardened and grizzled person. There's really nothing intimidating about me, I don't think. I knew I had balls of steel, but unless you challenged me, no one else would. I was a 27-year-old exhausted single mother, just trying to get home with my kids and belongings in tow. We were on the final leg of our journey home. Being so tired and wiped out, my defenses were down. So when I managed to get up the stairs onto the train, and realized that the car was empty except for one homeless man, I just didn't feel that it was worth it to continue through the train cars to a more populated one. I observed this guy and quickly took a mental note of him, as was my habit. He was at the end of the train in the last car, right next to and opposite the door that I had entered from. He didn't look to be something that I should be afraid of. Remember, I worked with this population every day, and I knew that most of these people are nothing to be scared of. In my experience, most of these guys just had a shitty life, followed by a series of bad decisions, and/or an inability to learn from their own mistakes. In fact, when I was traveling on my own, it was a habit of mine to sit down in the empty seat next to a homeless person, if they didn't appear intoxicated or schizophrenic, that no one else would take and strike up a conversation. If you ever want to see true joy in the eyes of another human, sit down next to a homeless person and talk to them like a regular person. You will make their day. But I digress. He appeared to be in his mid-40s, unkempt, shaggy dark hair and scruffy facial hair, wearing several layers of raggedy stained clothes with an oversized coat that hung past his knees. He had a tall can of beer in his hand that I had noticed, but he didn't seem overly attentive to my presence. Even though this man didn't set off a fear response for me, I was not in the mood to deal with an intoxicated hobo with my girls tonight. So I headed up the train, hoping that we would make it on to the next car before we started moving. No such luck. Being the only group that got on the train at this stop, the train pulled off quickly and I had only made it near the end of the car. Balancing a tot on one hip, holding the hand of the other and all the weight of the bags and purses on the other shoulder, we just kind of dropped and wilted into the empty seats that we were next to at the front of the car. We didn't have to go far now, and I could see from my vantage point 2 people on the car ahead of me. I was in the habit of placing my girls on one seat to situate bags, and I always sat in the aisle seat as a protective measure. While we were getting settled and the train gets going, I hear this guy in the back start singing to himself. Honestly, I don't remember what. I just remember he seemed happy. I had filed this away in my brain as just another homeless guy riding the train at night, on a loop to stay warm, which they did often. Most of the time, they didn't bother anyone because they don't want to get kicked off the train. I figured he had panhandled enough that night for a beer and a ticket, and I did not begrudge him a little joy and warmth, as long as he stayed away from my kids. As I'm sitting there attending to my girls, kind of half aware of the hobo in the back, I slowly register that his singing is getting a little louder, more boisterous and closer. I glance over my shoulder to see him hobbling in our direction, and looking at my toddler who is peeking at him over the back of the seat as she's sitting on her knees. I start to pay a little more attention to his whereabouts, but again, there's nothing that says to me he's dangerous. I have no problem enforcing boundaries with strangers in public, but I also have a lot of compassion for these guys. After all, with a couple of different turns in my own past, that could have been me. It's apparent this guy has had more than one tall boy that night, as he is sort of swaying and slurring his words. But he appears to be singing for my little top because she is tickled pink, giggling and smiling the more animated his singing becomes. I study his face, but his smile doesn't seem creepy to me at all. He honestly doesn't seem like a possible Chester to me or have any ill intent. He just seemed to enjoy entertaining an adorable little girl. Maybe he had had kids of his own somewhere that he had missed, or maybe he was just lonely. Even so, I didn't want to engage with this guy and encourage him, so I was paying a little more attention to what he was doing now out of my peripheral view. By this time, he had made it pretty close to us and he had dropped into a bench seat that was a couple rows on the opposite side of us, roughly 7 feet away. We were sitting in the forward-facing seats at the front of the car. Now, I was wary but still not afraid or skeeved out by this guy. He starts chatting at me at this point. In his slurred speech, he says, "Beautiful family you got there. You're a lucky mom to have such cute kids." I'm so not in the mood to talk to anyone right now. But as I said, I have too much compassion for people down on their luck, so I just politely say, "Thank you," without turning around. Still slurring, he launches into a tale about the family he used to have, and everything that had went wrong with his life. It doesn't seem to matter to him that I'm not really engaging, but he's not coming any closer to us, so I don't stop him or interrupt. Now what happens next is my first inkling that this guy may not be what he seems. It's not so much what he says that does it, but the sudden shift in tone and personality. He's not slurring anymore. The volume of his voice had dropped a bit, and the tone of his voice changes to this Hannibal Lecter smugness. He's not talking to me anymore, but at my tot who was peeking at him again over my shoulder. "Hello, little girl." Now this guy had my full attention. Every cell in my body is saying, "Pay attention to this. Hello, Clarice, weirdo." I look over my shoulder to look directly at him, and really assesses his demeanor. His joviality seemed to be gone and I don't see a happy hobo anymore, but a leering grin on his face that doesn't reach his dead-looking brown eyes. He is looking at my littlest tot, but then shifts his eyes to look at my 7-year-old, who is also staring at him, although looking less entertained than her sister. This is the moment my blood runs cold. In that same Hannibal tone of voice, still not slurring, he says, "Oh, aren't you the pretty one? Such pretty white skin. So sexy." I'm looking directly at him when he says this, and what I see in his face had me terrified. I did not like the way that he was looking at my daughter, like she was a piece of meat. He realizes that I'm looking at him, and shifts his eyes to look at me now, and grins a little wider to show me a perfectly white intact smile that seems incongruous with the rest of his get-up. I also notice that while his attire is dirty, he himself seems pretty clean, and his scruffy facial hair has a distinct line as if he had shaved it that way with purpose. Now maybe I'm just paranoid due to my past. Maybe this guy had gotten free dental work. Maybe he had showered at a shelter but had nothing clean to put back on. Maybe he had gotten a free shave from a barber giving back. There are plenty of plausible explanations for what I observe, but it's when I lock eyes with this guy that alarm bells go off in my head. What kind of man calls a 7-year-old sexy? And why did his demeanor change so suddenly? Why did he seem perfectly sober? I have absolutely no doubt this man is a predator. My intuition, which I trust completely, says to get the heck away from this guy now. All of this goes through my head in nanoseconds. I stand up and I pick up my bags, adrenaline surging, heft the little one back up to my hip and grab the hand of my oldest, and head for the door of the car. Because I want the two people in the car ahead of me to hear, I wait for the doors to open before I turn back to him and loudly say with my mama bear authority, "You stay away from us." I didn't care if I was wrong in my assumption, and I didn't care anymore if I hurt his feelings. I lumber to the front of this car and again sit in the very frontward seat. I don't go any further because this happens to be a long train, with probably 6 or 7 cars, and I don't see anybody on the next couple of cars from my vantage point. I wanted to stay with the other passengers. It's not unusual for this train to be empty this far away from downtown, and at this time in the night in between the commute rush and the Friday night club crawl. I'm used to disembarking alone, or with very few others on my stop when I work this late. I'm starting to panic at this point about what I would do at my stop coming up. It is also on the part of the line that is still above ground, and I'm not going to have a crowd of people to get lost in. This creep could easily follow me on my walk through the complex and either attack me alone or follow me home. Because I'm pondering my predicament and literally terrified, I don't immediately register that the people who are on the car with me have gotten off the train and I am now alone again. Several minutes go by and we are getting closer to our stop, when I hear the whoosh of the car doors opening behind me. Please be another passenger. I'm praying to myself before I look behind me. Nope. It's creepy Hannibal Hobo, heading towards me again, but this time he's glaring at me. No more smile, no more singing, no more slurring. Just an evil glare as he plods my direction. He's got his left hand up on the overhead bar with his right hand, seeming to hold something inside his jacket as he plods toward me. My stomach drops into my toes and my heart leaps into my throat. We are all alone, several cars behind anyone that I can see. I don't wait to find out what he's got in his jacket. I hadn't set down any bags this time. They were still over my shoulder and I was still holding my youngest. So I grab the hand of my oldest and tell her we need to get to the front. I can tell that she is scared now too, but I'm trying not to frighten her too bad. I kind of push and pull her gently in front of me, thinking, if I can get to the front car, even if it's empty, I'll be right behind the conductor. I'm going as fast as I can, which isn't very fast with everything that I'm juggling. As I'm nearing the doors again, I can see that the next car is empty, but the next car has people. I'm almost there as long as he doesn't catch up to us, and we would be safe. We are now almost to my stop, and the train is slowing down again. I hear the doors swoosh open again behind me. Crap, crap. I glance over my shoulder to see this guy running at me. Jesus. I had never been so terrified in my entire life. I moved as fast as I can into the next car, but I now know I'm not going to make it to the next filled with people. And no one seems to be looking this way from the car ahead, and the train is pulling into the stop. This is that moment when time just seems to slow down. I'm thinking this guy is planning to incapacitate me with no hands to defend myself, and he was going to run off the stopping train with one or both of my girls. Now my adrenaline is surging and I can feel my heart thumping at warp speed. I drop the bags from my shoulder and not giving one crap about what is in them now. I needed free movement. I tell my 7-year-old to stay behind me as I squat down to plop my youngest on the train floor. In one motion I turn around to raise up, pull my pocket knife out of my back pocket, and flip it open, taking a wide-legged defensive stance. I don't know if it was the security of my knife in my hand, or that one final surge of adrenaline, but I swear to God as I stood up, I grew. I felt like Mario having just gotten his mushroom. I felt invincible, 3 times my size and superhuman. No one was going to get through me to my babies even if I was going to get stabbed. He stopped dead in his tracks when he sees the knife about 5 feet in front of me. I sway a bit, with the brake on the train bringing it to a halt, but I keep my footing. Without thinking, I scream at this guy. Take one more step and I'll cut your balls off and choke you with them. I see his eyes widen at this. He obviously did not expect this kind of reaction. He looks at my eyes and looks at the knife. Looks behind me at my kids and one more time glances back to my eyes. And then he turns tail and runs out the open doors and off the train. I barely register a couple of college students by the look of them, hop onto my car and immediately hop off. Probably because I'm still standing there looking like a psycho with a knife out. I hear the ding and swoosh of the doors closing again, and the train moves on. At this point, I just kind of crumple to the floor, and hugged my kids to me and bursted into tears. My oldest was crying now too, while her little sister is just completely bewildered. I didn't move from the floor until we pulled into the next stop at West Portal, where we disembarked and I called my roommate and best friend. He was a man with big biceps and uncanny strength for his size. I wanted him to meet me at the train stop so we didn't have to walk through the complex alone in the dark after this craziness, which of course he did because he's amazing like that. I never stayed on an empty train after that. No matter how tired I am, I will move to a car full of people. I never saw Hannibal Hobo again either, and I don't care to. I don't think he ever wants to meet me again either. This happened when both me and my friend Jay were 15. I was spending the night at his house, as I often did. It was a normal enough night. We watched movies, played a couple of video games, and stayed up way too late. It was about 2 a.m. I think when we heard a loud banging coming from the front door. Luckily at the time, we were in his kitchen at the back of the house so no one could see us. We were spooked because there shouldn't have been anyone at the door at this hour, but we figured it was some drunk person and that they would go away soon enough. After 30 seconds, there was more banging on the door, and yelling that neither of us could understand. It sounded like an adult man, and he sounded angry, so we were both scared. He texted his mom, who we thought was upstairs, but she said that she had left a bit before without saying anything. She did that often enough. She liked to go to her friend's house in the middle of the night, so we didn't pay any attention or notice when she left. We didn't know what to do, as we were scared to call the police based off past experiences with cops and our small town being not the best. At this point, we turned off the kitchen light and were ducked down on the ground. We heard the banging and yelling getting louder, and I decided to see who it was, if it was anyone that we knew. I army crawled through the dining room, which was also dark, and peeked through the door to the living room, which is where the front door was. There is also a huge window by the door that you can see right into the dining room, so I was very careful not to be seen. I couldn't see any details of the man, but he looked to be about 6 feet tall and had gray hair. I crawled back to Jay, and we quietly decided what to do. We heard the knocking stop, so we decided to wait a bit before seeing if it was safe. We also decided to go under the table in the dining room in case he tried to come around back, which is where the kitchen was. After around 10 minutes of silence, we rock, paper, scissored who had to go check if he was there, and of course I lost. So I again army crawled to the dining room door. I saw the man staring through the window. Hands cupped against the glass. I made eye contact with him the moment he saw me, and I loudly said, "Crap," causing my friend to panic and crawl behind me. I saw him pull out his phone. He told me later that he was texting his mom to come home and save us. The man started yelling again, and this time I could make out a bit more of what he said. It was mostly cussing, although I definitely heard the phrase, "I'm going to kill you," in there a couple times. I quickly looked past the man to see if any of the neighbors seemed to notice him, but no luck. I crawled back out of his sight and again discussed what to do with my friend. We decided to go into the basement for safety, which you could get to by moving the fridge. It's a confusing house, I know, but it was really old and not meant for modern-sized appliances. We pulled out the fridge and got into the basement, feeling mostly safe but still terrified. I started having a panic attack, although I'm trying to hold it together best I can for Jay, who was also on the verge of having a panic attack. We heard a gunshot and a shattering of glass from above us, and I cover my mouth so I don't scream. Jay and I look at each other terrified. We hear footsteps and yelling above us, the man asking where we went. We hear him going upstairs and running around up there for a bit. He eventually comes back down and starts turning over furniture. I'm assuming to find us. After what felt like hours but was probably only minutes, Jay's mom pulls into the driveway, which scares the guy as he runs out the back door in the kitchen. Jay and I get out of the basement and run to greet his mom, never happier to see her. She was shocked by the state of the house and hugged us, happy that we were safe, and scared by how close we were to being hurt. We were all scared after that. After that night, they had better security installed, and we went over a safety protocol if anything ever happened again. Luckily, it hasn't happened again yet. Although, when I go to his house, I'm still scared. We never called the police because we know there wasn't much they could even do. We just cleaned up and moved on. It happened 8 years ago during the summer. A little backstory there. I was at my mom's house, but she barely lived there anymore. She spent most of her time at her boyfriend's, and my sister was very often left alone. I was a student in another city, but I came back on my house during the holidays. I was 19 and my sister was 16 at the time. Our house had 2 floors, a living room and a kitchen on the first floor, 3 bedrooms and a bathroom on the second floor. The kitchen and the living room had 2 door windows opening on a large terrace. From the terrace, you could go in the backyard by some stairs. We didn't really use the ground floor, as it was very dark due to these small windows, and it was basically a garage and an office to do our homework. Like I said, it was summer, very hot. I had just discovered Game of Thrones and I had 2 seasons to watch. Every evening, I took my laptop, made myself comfortable on the terrace, near the kitchen and watched an episode, or 10. My garden was surrounded by a U-shaped building, so you could see very well my terrace and my garden from the balconies. Some working men were there for a couple of days now, and were working late, so I often see them while I watch my series in the evening. They were minding their own business and so did I, so I didn't think much of it. One morning, I was sleeping late and my sister woke me up whispering, "Wake up, there's a man in the house." I was half naked because of the heavy heat of that summer. I stood up, perfectly awake now, grabbed a shirt and went downstairs, practically running. I know this is a dumb thing to do. A half-naked, helpless young woman, but I was very protective of my little sister, and I didn't feel any fear to this point. I went down to the kitchen. Couldn't find a sharp knife, so I took a fork. Absurd, I know. While I asked her where she saw him. She told me that she was watching TV in the living room, and because the windows were open, she saw a man in the reflection standing just behind her. She jumped off the couch, finding herself in front of him. A tall man in his late 30s. She had no chance in a fight. The guy had one of his feet on the first step to the second floor where I was sleeping. She shouted, "Who are you?" He didn't answer and he just walked quietly back in the kitchen, where the door window was wide open, and took the stairs back to the garden. As soon as I heard that, I ran in the backyard with my harmless weapon, to my gate in front of our garden. I even went in the street looking for him. I'm sure that if I had found him, I would not have been so brave anymore, and I would have peed myself. But well, no one. Suddenly, I realized my sister was still alone in the house, and maybe that guy was there too. I went back to the kitchen, searched in the house, but thank God we were alone. This is when I saw that my computer was missing. My sister told me that the guy didn't have anything in his hand when he left. That was the scariest part because it meant either he was in the house for quite some time before, he took the laptop, and came back to do whatever the heck he had planned to do, or there was another person in there too. I had put some decent clothes on and took my sister to the police station nearby. I am very angry with the policeman. She was a minor, so I stayed with her. She told them everything and described the guy with a lot of details. They asked her, "Could you recognize him?" And she said, "Yes, without a doubt." They said, "You know, it's highly unlikely that we find him. You should be thankful that you and your sister weren't hurt." Like she needed to be more frightened than she already was. They wrote in the deposition that she was too shaken up and could not recognize the man, even though she said the contrary multiple times. We never heard from them. When we came back in the house, she was very scared and I was very angry with the loss of my very expensive laptop. I needed it for art school and I had all my photos in there, and the attitude of the police. We both sat on the terrace and talked about what had happened, and how lucky we were that she saw that man before he came upstairs. This is when I noticed the working men weren't there anymore. From the streets, no one could ever know that we have a backyard and another entry in the house. My sister told me that the guy acted like he knew a bit of the house. Maybe it was the first time and we didn't notice. We never know. I'm almost certain it was one of those men working in the neighbor's balcony who had been watching me that broke in that morning. From that day, we double-locked the doors and slept in the same bed for weeks. I was 14 years old when I had to live with my grandparents. I had to live with them because my sister was in college and my parents were divorced. And they lived in this old bungalow-type house. It was one story and we had stairs that immediately go up to the attic. An attic which no one really uses, and we just put stuff in there. It's really too hot and stuffy up there anyways. The sole window up there didn't really help. The attic had old creaky wooden floors that I remember that I would have to polish with a coconut shell, because that's how we do it here in the Philippines. That and my grandparents are very traditional. Anyway, my dorm room was near these stairs leading up to the attic. Like you would open my door and then face right, and the stairs would immediately be right there. I hated that every time I left my room, because I would expect that something would be immediately ready to crawl down from the attic. One night, my grandparents had to pick up my aunt's family from the airport, but because of the hellish traffic here, they had to leave at 7 p.m., and their expected arrival back home would be at the most at 5 a.m. So a 14-year-old girl would be alone at home the whole time. I told them that I would be safe here. We lived in a gated community. We got tons of guard dogs, everything will be okay. Or so I thought. Before they left, we already had dinner, so I was stuck with cleaning the dishes and all. As I was doing that, I could hear a bunch of the neighboring dogs barking a lot. I didn't really think much of it, because the dogs always do that. When I finished cleaning up from dinner, I immediately had to lock every door and window, and shut off all the lights before heading to bed. When I entered my room, the lights were on and it looked normal. My anime posters were on the wall, my closet was untouched. My bed was next to my barred, tinted windows. We had to tint them because I was on the first floor, and my grandparents wanted to make sure that no one would peep in through a young girl's room. They were barred too because my uncle, who used to use the room, always escaped through there to go to parties. This was my grandparents' solution to that. Nothing was out of place to alarm me. Everything was normal. Until I turned off the lights. As soon as I did that, a silhouette of a man was illuminated by the streetlights outside. He looked like he had thick curly hair and a skinny build. I thought I was having a hallucination. So I turned on the lights again and he was gone. I did it again and he was back again. Turned on, gone. Turned off, gone. I sighed in relief. I was just tricking myself, I guess. Or something else was casting the shadow. I double-locked my door just to be safe, one with the doorknob lock and one of those door latches type locks, and then I tucked myself in. It was hard to fall asleep when a lot of dogs were barking outside. They weren't our dogs, but the neighbors. When I was finally falling asleep, I heard something from above me moving. Something in the attic. I pushed down the thought. I'm tricking myself again. I hugged my pillow. It's just rats, I said to myself. But these rats seemed heavy and were also pushing furniture around. My heart sank when I heard them hurriedly go down the stairs and stop at the bottom. I covered myself with a blanket and I waited for something. I was also wishing that my parents had given me a phone at a time like this, but I only waited in bated breath. Suddenly, I heard my doorknob being gently fiddled. I wanted to vomit when I heard a click, followed by a quiet turn of the knob. The knob turned, but it didn't budge. When they noticed, they tried to push it. This time, I finally stood up, shaking. I was a kid, home alone with no phone, no means of defense. All that was saving me was this thick door from the old days. I softly pushed my body up against the door, and I locked everything up again. I didn't want to make a sound, I didn't want to scream. I didn't want them to know that I was here. I don't know why he stopped, but he did. I didn't go back to my bed. I just sat there at the door, waiting. It felt like forever. I heard footsteps go up the stairs, but I still sat there. I saw something move in the corner of my eye. There, out the window, the shadow was back. I forced myself not to look. All I could think of was, thank God they were barred. I don't remember what happened after that. I think I fell asleep or I was too scared to even think straight. I just remember, the next day when my family and I were having breakfast, I casually brought it up. Grandfather, I think I heard footsteps up in the attic last night. My grandmother scoffed. It's probably rats. I never brought it up again. I didn't want them to worry. I probably was. But I do know this. Our dogs were caged up near the gate and were far from my room, so they wouldn't have seen anything. The only dogs who were near my room were the neighbors. Also, there was nothing outside my window that could cast a shadow that looked like a man. And lastly, the attic window was open. I grew up in a tiny French village in mid-northern France, in an area that is most well known for its massive forest. My little village was in the middle of this forest, surrounded by trees from all sides. Most of its secluded population was of an elderly demographic. The forest was large enough that if you walked into it in one direction, it would be hours, even days if you chose a bad trajectory, until you would find any other proper civilization, aside from the occasional lone road. Now don't get me wrong, the forest is lovely and I have spent many cherished memories there. But it's also rather secluded, and I can only begin to imagine what mysterious things happened under the cover of so many dense twigs, branches, and leaves. Anyway, on to the story. Every day to get to school, my mom would drive me and my sister to school in the next town over. The town was also in this forest. However, on this fateful morning, we had to stop the car mere seconds after driving off. In the middle of this rather narrow and seldom used road was an elderly woman in her nightgown, splattered with mud and bruises and seemingly exhausted beyond her wits. She was barefoot, her feet blackened by mud and caked with lashes of blood. She didn't flinch as the car crawled forward towards her, nor did she show any sign of relief as my mom stepped out of the car to greet her. She was terribly confused and didn't seem entirely sure what to say or how to begin. For a moment, she just babbled incomprehensibly, but within a few seconds, a somewhat coherent sentence began to form. She was repeating that she had ran. She had ran all night. It was around 7:30 a.m. in early springs though, the sun had only just risen not long ago. She said that she had ran through the forest, not knowing where to go, but as she went on, it became clear that she had been trying to escape something. She paused, catching her breath and gathering her thoughts. It was clear that this all was a mess in her mind, and just now she was trying to collect everything coherently. Someone, she continued, had kept her locked up in a cellar. She didn't know where or how long, or who it was that had locked her up, but she remembered it was very damp and muddy. She didn't remember how she got out of the cellar. All she knew was that she was in the dead of the forest in the dead of the night, and so she ran as much as her frail body would allow. At this point, it seems like she had nothing more to say, for it seemed like her nighttime escape had culminated in us meeting her. I don't exactly remember what she and my mom discussed next, but it resulted in my mother calling the old lady's son, who lived on the other side of the village. A few minutes later, he arrived and told us that we should leave. Fast forward a few days, and I asked my mom if she knew what became of the old lady after we had left her. I'm not sure how my mom found out this next bit, but apparently a few men had broken into her house that night or morning, had beaten her and ransacked her home, stealing some of her priceless possessions. She had apparently fled for cover into the forest, which was only a few meters away from her house. Now, if that isn't creepy enough, a few extra details stick into my mind. First, we found her in the middle of that narrow road. It turns out that she was standing right next to her house. Perhaps the burglars were still in her home as we spoke to her. Her sense of time did seem distorted after all. Secondly, no mention of the supposed cellar she was kept in was made. It had to be a fiction of her panic and delusion. Or had she really been locked up in a cellar somewhere in the forest, only for no one to believe her? It seems unlikely, but you do occasionally stumble upon old and grotty stone huts and ruins in the forest. Perhaps some of them hide a few gruesome tales. Unfortunately, we never really spoke to that family again, so we never got to find out about what really happened that night. I believe the elderly lady is now deceased. We will never fully find out the truth about that cellar. Nonetheless, whenever I return home and drive past that house in that narrow street, I can't help but remember the frail lady standing alone in her muddy nightgown.